Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto's Rasengan could heal hearts and he won a harem through compassion? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Resonating Sphere. The mist was a shroud, thick and clinging, tasting of salt and secrets. It coiled around the half-finished bridge like a slumbering serpent, muffling sound and stealing the warmth from Naruto Uzumaki's bones. It was a cold, wet blanket that did little to soothe the inferno raging in his chest. Red chakra, hot and malevolent, leaked from his skin in wisps, turning the surrounding vapor a faint, bloody pink. It was the Nine Tails power, a familiar rage that tasted like ozone and old hatred, a power he had come to rely on when his own fell short. And right now, it was falling very short. Sasuke was down, not just beaten, but turned into a human pincushion, Senbon needles glittering darkly from his neck and chest. He lay still, unnervingly still, a testament to the impossible speed of the masked shinobi before him. Haku, the boy with a girl's face and eyes that held a winter's sorrow, now shielded behind a porcelain mask painted with red swirls. You, Naruto's voice was a low growl, the sound of grinding stones. The red chakra flared, bubbling from his skin and shaping itself into the ghostly, shimmering form of a fox's head. His whisker marks deepened, becoming jagged and feral. His canines elongated. "I'm going to kill you." The promise was raw, visceral. It was the only language he knew for this kind of pain, the only currency he had to pay for the sight of his teammate, his rival, his friend, lying broken on the cold steel of the bridge. The sight of Sasuke, the calm and collected Uchiha prodigy, sacrificing himself for the dead last, the village idiot. It had broken something deep inside Naruto. A dam had burst, and all that was pouring out was the Kyuubi's fury. Haku stood impassively within his demonic mirroring ice crystals, a dome of 20 frozen mirrors that defied the laws of physics. His reflection multiplied into infinity, a legion of cold-eyed assassins watching Naruto's rage boil over. A shard of ice was in each hand. That anger. Haku's voice echoed from all directions, calm and detached, a disembodied sound that seemed to come from the mist itself. "It is a powerful tool. But it is unfocused. You cannot defeat me. It is your fate to lose here." Fate. The word was a spark on a short fuse. Naruto hated that word with a passion that rivaled his love for ramen. His whole life had been one long, defiant scream against fate. He was the orphan, the dead last, the Jinchuriki, the pariah who would one day have his face carved into the Hokage monument. He didn't have time for fate. He surged forward, a streak of orange and screaming red. The world dissolved into a blur of motion and the crystalline chime of ice. He lunged at one mirror, his claws extended, aiming to tear the frozen edifice apart. But the Haku in that mirror was just an illusion. As his claws screeched against the surface, a volley of Senbon erupted from another mirror to his left. The needles, guided by a master's hand, didn't aim for lethal points. They tore at his muscles, his joints, seeking to immobilize, to dismantle him piece by piece like a broken puppet. But the Kyuubi's chakra was a relentless furnace. It burned away the pain, knitting flesh and sinew back together almost as fast as Haku could tear it apart. The needles were expelled from his body by a fresh surge of demonic energy. He was a force of nature, a miniature hurricane of instinct and fury. He spun, lashing out, but Haku was a ghost. He was everywhere and nowhere, a phantom of ice and speed, his movements a symphony of silent, deadly efficiency. Naruto was all rage and power. Haku was all grace and precision. It was a battle between a sledgehammer and a scalpel, and the scalpel was winning. "It's useless," the voice echoed again, laced with a pity that only stoked Naruto's fire. "You move on instinct, like a wild beast thrashing in a cage. But I have a purpose. I am Zabuza-sama's tool. I have no dreams of my own. My heart exists only to serve his will, to ensure his dream becomes a reality." The words struck a chord deep within Naruto, a dissonant note beneath the melody of his rage. A tool, a heart that existed for someone else. He remembered the cold loneliness of his apartment, the sting of hateful glares on his back, the desperate, aching hunger for acknowledgement. He had been so empty then, a vessel waiting to be filled with anything other than loneliness. What would he have become if the first person to see him, to give him a purpose, had been someone like Zabuza? The thought was a crack in the pristine surface of his fury. Through that crack, another feeling bled through. A profound, aching sadness. It was a bewildering sensation. It wasn't for himself. It was for the boy in the mirrors. His wild movements hitched for a fraction of a second. That was all Haku needed. A volley of Senbon, thicker this time, struck his shoulder and leg, anchoring him in place. This time, the pain registered, sharp and clear. He stumbled back with a grunt. The red chakra wavering for a moment. His own blue eyes, wide and bewildered, took in the scene beyond the ice dome. Zabuza stood near the edge of the bridge, his massive kubikiribocho propped on his shoulder. He was watching the display with a cold, professional interest, a general observing a particularly effective siege engine. He was a demon, a monster who had tried to kill their sensei, their client, all of them. He was the enemy. But Haku looked at Zabuza with an adoration that was terrifying in its purity. Naruto had seen that look before. He had seen it in the mirror when he thought of Iruka-sensei treating him to ramen. It was the look of a person who had found their entire world in one person's gaze. And it was wrong. Utterly, horribly wrong. Iruka had wanted him to be a great shinobi, to be himself. Zabuza wanted Haku to be a weapon. You're lying, Naruto gasped, pulling the needles from his shoulder with a wet tear of flesh. The Kyuubi's power surged back, but it was different now. The raw, mindless hatred was tempered by a new, sharp clarity. It wasn't just an uncontrolled inferno, it was a focused beam, a searchlight cutting through the mist of his own emotions. You think that's your purpose. But you're just afraid. You're afraid of being alone again, aren't you? The silence from the mirrors was immediate and absolute. It was heavier than the mist, more chilling than the ice. For the first time, Naruto had struck a nerve deeper than any physical blow could ever reach. He could feel it, a tremor in the very air, a flicker of raw, unadulterated pain that had nothing to do with the body. It was a strange sensation, like hearing a sound just beyond the edge of his perception. The Kyuubi's chakra, usually a roaring ocean of hate that drowned out everything else, was now acting like a sensitive membrane, vibrating in sympathy with the emotional chaos emanating from Haku. It was a new and disorienting sensation. The demon inside him was a creature of pure emotion. And for the first time, Naruto was consciously sensing the emotions of another through it. You don't know anything about me, Haku's voice returned, but the calm detachment was gone. It was brittle now, thin as a freshly frozen sheet of ice. I know what it's like to be treated like a monster. Naruto roared back, his mind flashing with 1,000 painful images, villagers recoiling from him in the street, shopkeepers barring their doors, the whispers of demon and monster that had followed him his entire life. To have everyone look at you like you're not even human. Feel so worthless you'd do anything for the first person who looks at you and doesn't see a freak. But that doesn't mean you have to be a weapon. It doesn't mean you have to throw away your own heart. He thrust his hand out, pouring chakra into his palm. But it wasn't for a shadow clone. It was for something else. A technique his perverted hermit of a sensei, Jiraiya, had drilled into him until his arm felt like it would fall off. The pinnacle of shape manipulation. The Rasengan. He had struggled with it for weeks, popping water balloons and rubber balls until his hand was raw. He could barely form it under normal circumstances. And he'd never once used it in a real fight. But now, it felt different. The Kyuubi's chakra wasn't just an amplifier, it was a catalyst. It grabbed hold of his own swirling blue chakra, forcing it into a perfect, violent rotation with an ease he had never experienced before. A screeching whine filled the air, a sound like 1,000 angry hornets, as a sphere of brilliant blue energy, contained by a thin, unstable shell, materialized in his hand. It churned and thrashed like a caged beast, a miniature typhoon of pure, destructive power. He looked at the orb, then at the reflections of the sad-eyed boy in the mirrors. Kill him, the Kyuubi's voice whispered in the back of his mind, a seductive hiss of promised vengeance. He hurt your friend. He tried to kill you. Make him pay. Obliterate him. But another voice, quieter and more insistent, his own, asked a different question. Look at him. He's just like you were. Alone. Scared. What if killing him is the wrong answer? Heal him. The thought was an earthquake. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It wasn't a voice, but a profound, undeniable instinct. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the Rasengan in his palm. The Kyuubi's raw, emotional energy and his own desperate desire to connect, to be understood, to save someone from the loneliness that had almost consumed him. They were swirling together in that sphere. They were creating something new. Something more. He looked at Sasuke's still form, the red of his own blood a stark contrast to the dark blue of his Uchiha shirt. Killing Haku wouldn't wake Sasuke up. It wouldn't change anything. It would just create another cycle of pain, another lonely kid dying for a cause that was never his own, leaving another broken man like Zabuza behind. He thought of Iruka's warmth, Kakashi's quiet, grudging approval, even Sakura's worried frown. They were his precious people. They were what had saved him from becoming a tool. Haku had no one. He wasn't a weapon. He was Naruto Uzumaki, and he was going to do things his way. "I'm not going to kill you," Naruto said, his voice steady and clear, cutting through the whine of the Rasengan. The angry red aura around him softened, its jagged edges bleeding away until it was a vibrant, golden orange, like a sunrise breaking through the mist. It felt warm, powerful, and utterly his own. "I'm going to save you from yourself." With a roar that was part defiance and part promise, he charged the dome of mirrors. Haku reacted instantly, appearing from a mirror directly in front of him. Senbon aimed at his heart. But Naruto was faster. His movements were no longer wild and uncontrolled. They were fueled by a singular, unwavering purpose. He didn't dodge. He didn't block. He pushed the Rasengan forward. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He saw the flicker of surprise in Haku's eyes, the slight widening of his pupils behind the mask. He saw the needles leave Haku's hand. Silver glints in the gray light. He felt a sharp, cold sting in his chest, a pain that was distant and unimportant. And then the Rasengan made contact. There was no explosion, no shattering impact, no roar of destructive force. For Haku, the world simply dissolved. One moment, he was driving his needles into the Jinchuriki's chest, a clean, efficient strike to pierce the lung and end the fight. The next, a sun bloomed against his stomach. It wasn't a feeling of force, of being thrown back or torn apart. It was a feeling of arrival. A warm, golden light flooded his senses. It bypassed his skin, his muscles, his bones, and sank directly into his soul. The demonic mirroring ice crystals, extensions of his will and his bloodline, didn't shatter, they melted. They dissolved into pools of perfectly clear water that hissed and steamed against the cold steel of the bridge, vanishing as if they had never been. The icy armor around his heart, built over years of pain and self-loathing. A fortress constructed from Zabuza's cold words and the world's rejection, met that golden light and simply ceased to exist. It was not a violent process. It was a gentle, inexorable thaw. He felt the bindings on his spirit. The chains of duty and gratitude that he had willingly wrapped around himself, turned to fine, golden dust. The cold, hard belief that he was nothing more than a tool, a weapon to be wielded and discarded, was washed away in a tide of unconditional warmth and understanding. Memories, long suppressed, surfaced not as painful specters but as gentle ghosts. He saw his mother's smile, her hand on his head as she sang him a lullaby, before the fear and the blood had tainted that memory forever. He saw his father's eyes, not filled with the homicidal hatred of a man killing a monster, but with a terrible, desperate terror of a man who didn't understand his own blood. The trauma was still there, the events of his past hadn't been erased, but the crippling, soul-freezing pain associated with them was gone. It was replaced by a profound, heart-wrenching sorrow, a grief that was clean and pure, no longer twisted into self-hatred and a desperate need for purpose. He saw Zabuza, not as a savior or a master, but as another broken boy hiding behind a fearsome reputation, a lost soul who had found a shard of himself in Haku's unwavering devotion. The love he felt for him was still there, but it was no longer a blind, suffocating thing that demanded self-annihilation. It was clear, sad, and knowing. He loved Zabuza the man, not Zabuza the master. Tears, hot and real, streamed from under his mask, carving clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. He was on his knees, though he didn't remember falling. The Rasengan was gone. The orange-clad boy stood before him, swaying on his feet. A cluster of senbon embedded in his chest, blood staining the front of his jacket a dark, ugly crimson. But his eyes were a brilliant, piercing blue, and they held no malice, no triumph. Only a deep, staggering empathy that was more overwhelming than any attack. Zabuza stared, his single visible eye wide with disbelief. He had seen the Rasengan form, a jutsu rumored to be created by the fourth Hokage. He had braced for the sound of impact, for Haku's body to be thrown, broken and mangled, across the bridge. Instead, his apprentice, his perfect weapon, was kneeling, mask askew. Weeping with a shuddering, racking vulnerability he hadn't shown since the day Zabuza found him starving in the snows of the Land of Water. The demonic chakra that had surrounded the Uzumaki boy was gone, replaced by an aura so warm and bright it seemed to physically push back the oppressive mist. This was not the power of a demon. This was something else entirely. Just then, a new sound cut through the surreal quiet. The slow, mocking clap of hands. A corpulent man with a tiny bowler hat and a cheap, pinstripe suit stepped out of the newly thinning mist. He was flanked by 100 hired thugs. A motley collection of cell swords, bandits, and ronin, all armed with rusty blades, crude spears, and the hungry look of jackals. Gato, the shipping magnate who had hired them, the source of the land of waves, misery. Well, Gato sneered, his voice oily and smug, a sound that set Naruto's teeth on edge. What a touching little soap opera. I was wondering when the gray demon of the mist would finally go soft. Turns out, all it took was a little brat in an orange jumpsuit. I've decided to amend our contract, Zabuza. Your services are no longer required. And to save on severance pay, I'll just have my boys kill you all. Get 'em. The thugs laughed, a ragged, ugly sound that shattered the fragile peace. They surged forward, a wave of scum and steel, their eyes gleaming with greed and the promise of senseless violence. Zabuza tensed, his hand tightening on the hilt of his executioner's blade. He was injured from his fight with Kakashi, his chakra dangerously low. Kakashi was still recovering from overusing his Sharingan. The genin were spent, and Haku was broken in a way Zabuza didn't begin to comprehend. This was a bad position. A fatal one. But then Naruto moved. He didn't reach for a kunai. He didn't make a hand seal. He took a deep, centering breath, ignoring the stabbing pain from the needles in his chest. The golden-orange chakra, which had faded after his attack, bloomed around him once more, richer and more potent than before. He held out his hands, one to each side, palms up. In each palm, a new Rasengan formed. These were different. They didn't screech with contained power like the first one. They hummed, a low, resonant frequency like a temple bell being struck miles away. The churning chakra within wasn't a chaotic storm of blue, it was a gentle, swirling nebula of soft, golden light. It felt peaceful. Rasengan. Harmony, Naruto whispered, the name coming to him as if he'd known it his whole life. He didn't run at the mob. He simply slammed his palms down onto the steel deck of the bridge. The effect was instantaneous and utterly bizarre. A wave of invisible energy, of pure, unadulterated positive emotion, washed over the charging mob. It wasn't a shockwave that threw them back or a blast that burned them. It was a psychic tsunami that washed through them, ignoring their bodies and striking directly at their minds and hearts. The first rank of thugs, their faces twisted in snarling cruelty, suddenly stopped dead in their tracks. Their expressions went slack, their eyes glazing over. A big, ugly man with a scar bisecting his eye dropped his sword with a loud clatter. His mind, which moments before had been filled with thoughts of plunder and murder, was now replaying a long-forgotten memory of his mother baking bread. So vivid he could almost smell the yeast and feel the warmth of the kitchen. The man next to him, a wiry killer who hadn't felt an ounce of compassion in 20 years, felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to lie down in a field of flowers and watch the clouds drift by. Another, a hulking brute with murder in his eyes, broke into quiet tears, overwhelmed by a sudden, crushing sense of goodwill towards his fellow man. The entire army of cutthroats ground to a halt, their minds flooded with feelings of peace, contentment, nostalgia, and a brotherly love so potent it was almost nauseating. They stood there, dazed and confused, looking at their weapons as if they were alien objects. What was the point of a sword when you could be thinking about your first childhood pet? Why raise a spear when you could remember the taste of your grandmother's soup? Their violent intent, the bedrock of their miserable lives, had been completely and utterly erased, replaced by a profound sense of placid confusion. Gato's jaw dropped, his smug expression melting into one of slack-jawed disbelief. What is this? What did you do, you little freak? He shrieked, his voice cracking. Naruto gave him a tired, sad smile. He swayed on his feet, the blood loss and massive chakra expenditure finally catching up to him. Just reminded them what it feels like to be human, he said, his voice barely a whisper. The moment of stunned silence was broken by a blur of motion. Zabuza, his face a mask of awe and dawning, terrifying comprehension, moved with a speed that defied his injuries. He didn't attack Naruto. He swept past him, his massive blade a whisper of steel in the mist, a silent, dark promise. Gato let out a choked squawk. He had no time to scream, no time to process the betrayal. The executioner's blade, a weapon meant for cleaving bone and sinew, passed through his thick neck as if it were made of butter. Gato's head tumbled from his shoulders, a look of comical surprise etched on its face for its last second of existence before it rolled off the bridge and plunged into the churning water below. The rest of the thugs, snapped out of their blissful stupor by the sudden, shocking act of violence, looked at the headless body of their employer spouting blood, then at the blood-soaked demon of the mist standing over it, his one visible eye burning with a new, strange light. Then they looked at each other, at the strange warmth still lingering in their chests, dropped their weapons, and ran for their lives, a disorderly retreat of profoundly confused men. Zabuza stood panting over Gato's corpse, the bridge suddenly silent save for the lapping of the waves below and the sound of Haku's quiet, broken sobs. He turned, not to Kakashi, but to Naruto, who was now leaning heavily on a railing. His face pale as a sheet. You, Zabuza started, his voice rough with disbelief. That power, what in the hell are you? Before Naruto could answer, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed in a heap on the cold steel. Naruto, Sakura screamed, her voice shrill with panic. Kakashi, finally stirring, moved to his side, his single eye wide. But it was Haku who reached him first. The masked boy, his face still streaked with tears, scrambled forward and gently cradled Naruto's head in his lap. He looked at the Senbon in Naruto's chest, the very same needles he had thrown with lethal intent only moments ago. His own attack, guilt, sharp and piercing, was a new and unwelcome sensation. He looked up at Zabuza, his eyes, visible now that his mask was cracked and askew, filled with a question. With a universe of pain and dawning, terrifying hope. Zabuza met his gaze, and for the first time in a very, very long time, the demon of the mist didn't know what to say. He looked at the pacified thugs wandering away in a daze, at the fallen body of his employer, and at the unconscious boy who had defeated an army not with force, but with feeling. Everything he thought he knew about power, about the world of the shinobi, had just been turned upside down. Far away, in a land shrouded in perpetual shadow where the sun never truly rose, a man knelt before a simple, unadorned altar of black, volcanic rock. His face was hidden by a porcelain mask bearing the symbol of a weeping eye, but his posture was one of reverent, absolute worship. He was a censor, one of a very particular and ancient kind. He did not feel the ebb and flow of chakra signatures. He felt the emotional state of the world. He fed on its despair, its hatred, its fear, its sorrow, and offered it up as tribute to the entity he served. For years, the ambient thrum of negativity had been a constant, comforting presence, a sign that his master, the great god of the primordial night, Amatsu Mikabashi, was pleased. The world was a beautiful symphony of suffering. But just now, for a brief, terrifying moment, a significant portion of that negative energy in a remote corner of the elemental nations, the land of waves, had simply vanished. It wasn't replaced by neutrality, by the quiet emptiness of death. It was overridden. It was annihilated by a blindingly powerful wave of pure, unadulterated positivity. It was a flicker on a global scale, a tiny anomaly in the grand, gloomy tapestry of the world. But to his unique senses, it felt like a dagger of pure sunlight had been plunged into his mind. It was agonizing. It was blasphemy, an annoyance, the man murmured to the cold stone, his voice a sibilant whisper. A flicker of light, an aberration in the grand design. He bowed his head, his mind already turning to the methods of sowing discord, of amplifying pain, of nurturing hatred. The world was a garden of suffering, and he was its most devoted tender. He would not allow a single, hopeful weed to spoil the coming harvest. He would find the source of this light, and he would extinguish it. Naruto woke to the smell of antiseptic and sea salt. The first thing he registered was the gentle pressure of a cool cloth on his forehead. The second was the quiet, rhythmic sound of breathing nearby. He cracked his eyes open, his vision blurry. A figure sat by his futon, silhouetted against the paper screen of a window. As his eyes focused, he saw a young man with long, dark hair and delicate features, his face a mask of calm concern. It took him a moment to place him without the porcelain mask. "Haku," Naruto mumbled, his voice hoarse. Haku looked up, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "You are awake. That is good." Kakashi-sensei was worried. Naruto tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his chest made him wince and lie back down. He looked down and saw his jacket was gone, replaced by clean bandages wrapped tightly around his torso. "Sasuke, Sakura, are they okay?" "They are fine," Haku said, his voice soft. "Uchiha-san is recovering. He has a stubborn will. Haruno-san has been helping Tezuna's daughter with your care." Naruto processed this, his mind still fuzzy. He looked at Haku again. Truly looked at him. The profound, soul-deep sadness that had clung to the boy like a second skin was gone. In its place was a quiet clarity, a stillness that was both unnerving and peaceful. You're different." Haku nodded, lowering his gaze to his hands, which were folded in his lap. Your jutsu, it did not break me. I thought it would. I thought you would kill me." He paused, searching for the right words. "It was like I was a shattered vase, held together by sheer will and duty. Your power didn't destroy the pieces. It showed me how they were meant to fit together. It put me back together." He finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting Naruto's. "The pain is still there. I remember everything, but it doesn't own me anymore. Thank you." The sincerity in his voice was overwhelming. Naruto didn't know what to say. He had just acted on instinct, on a desperate feeling. He hadn't known what he was doing. "So you're not gonna try and kill us anymore?" Naruto asked, blunt as always. A shadow of a smile flickered on Haku's face. "No, I will not." The door slid open, and Zabuza Momochi ducked to enter the small room. He was unbandaged, his face set in its usual fearsome scowl. But his eyes were fixed on Naruto with a disturbing intensity. His massive blade was nowhere in sight, which Naruto decided was a good thing. He sat down in the corner, leaning against the wall, a silent, menacing presence. "What was that jutsu?" Zabuza's voice was a low rumble. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. "I've fought shinobi from all 5 great nations. I've seen every kind of bloodline and forbidden technique imaginable. I have never seen anything like that." Before Naruto could formulate an answer, the door opened again. Kakashi entered, his one eyeball eye crinkling in what Naruto recognized as a relieved smile. "He's awake. Good. Don't strain yourself, Naruto." "Kakashi-sensei, what happened? Where are we?" "We're at Tezuna's house. After you concluded the fight. Zabuza and Haku helped us bring you and Sasuke back," Kakashi explained, his gaze flickering towards the silent demon of the mist. "As for your jutsu, I have a theory." Kakashi looked from Naruto to Zabuza. The Kyuubi sealed inside Naruto is a being of pure chakra and raw emotion. "My guess is that when you were pushed to the edge, its chakra mixed with your own. But instead of just amplifying your rage, it resonated with your particular nature." He glanced at Naruto. "You've always been driven by your emotions, Naruto. Your desire to connect with people, to be acknowledged. The Rasengan is the pinnacle of shape manipulation. You combined perfect shape manipulation with chakra that was imbued with powerful, raw, empathetic emotion. You didn't create a ninjutsu that attacks the body. You created a ninjutsu of the heart." Zabuza snorted, but he didn't refute it. His eyes were still locked on Naruto, a mix of suspicion, awe, and calculation in their depths. The door slid open once more, revealing Sakura and a sullen-looking Sasuke, his arm in a sling. Sakura's eyes were red-rimmed, but she beamed when she saw Naruto was awake. Sasuke just leaned against the doorframe, his dark eyes unreadable. "Naruto, you idiot, you had us so worried," Sakura exclaimed, rushing to his side. "Hey, takes more than a few needles to take me down," Naruto grinned, though it was a weak effort. Sasuke finally spoke, his voice low and strained. "That power, it wasn't the Kyuubi. Not just that, I felt it, even unconscious. It was warm." He looked away, a faint blush on his cheeks. "You saved me, dope." The admission, quiet as it was, hit Naruto harder than any of Haku Senbon. Just then, Tazuna and his daughter Tsunami entered, carrying a tray of food. Their faces were alight with a gratitude so profound it was almost embarrassing. "Naruto-san, you are a hero," Tazuna boomed, setting the food down. "The whole village is celebrating. You didn't just save the bridge, you saved our spirit." In the midst of the chatter, Zabuza stood up. The room fell silent. He walked to the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over Team 7, before finally settling on Naruto again. "My contract with Gato is void," he stated, his voice flat and final. "I am no longer a missing nin for hire from Kurigakure. As of today, I am a Ronin. Haku and I will remain in the land of waves until the bridge is completed." Kakashi raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and why is that?" Zabuza's lips curled into something that might have been a sneer, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Consider it payment for a debt. The boy saved Haku's life. And in doing so, he showed me something new." His gaze was intense. "Power is not just about killing. I need to understand what I saw. And the best way to do that is to stick around the source." The implication was clear. He wasn't their friend. He was an observer. A dangerous, calculating observer who had just declared a truce born of sheer, stunned curiosity. Later that evening, the house was quiet. Naruto, feeling much better after a meal and some of Sakura's surprisingly competent first aid, stood by the window, looking out at the partially built bridge. It was illuminated by torches and the work of the villagers, who were now working day and night with a renewed vigor. It was a symbol of connection, of hope, of future. He thought about the feeling of the golden Rasengan in his hand. The harmony. It felt right. It felt like him. His whole life, he had been trying to get stronger to make people acknowledge him, to become Hokage. But maybe street strength wasn't just about bigger jutsu and harder punches. Maybe true strength was about healing the brokenness he saw everywhere, in Haku, in Zabuza, even in Sasuke. He looked back into the room. Haku was quietly meditating in a corner, his presence a calm pool of stillness. Zabuza was sharpening a kunai, his movements economical and deadly, but he was here, a part of this strange, temporary family. Sakura was asleep in a chair, and Sasuke was staring out another window, lost in his own complicated thoughts. The world was so much bigger and more complicated than he had ever imagined. His path to becoming Hokage suddenly seemed longer, but also infinitely more meaningful. As he stood there, a faint, cold shiver ran down his spine, a subconscious echo of a weeping eye in a land of shadow turning its gaze upon him. A predator sensing a strange, new light in its world of darkness. The game had changed, and he was only just beginning to understand the rules. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Gilded Cage. The return to Konoha was a surreal affair. The whispers that had once followed Naruto Uzumaki down the street, words like demon and monster, had been replaced by a new set of whispers. Hero, they said, savior of the wave. The words were better, but the looks in their eyes were largely the same. Fear, awe, and a fundamental misunderstanding that left him feeling just as isolated as before. They didn't see him. They saw a phenomenon, a walking, talking miracle or a terrifying weapon they were glad was pointed away from them. He was a story they told their children now, no longer a cautionary tale, but a folk hero. The distinction felt razor thin. The official debriefing took place in the Hokage's office, a room that smelled of old paper and pipe smoke. The third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, sat behind his desk, his aged face a mixture of grandfatherly concern and the sharp intelligence of a seasoned leader. To his right, in the shadows near the wall, stood Danzo Shimura, his bandaged face and cane exuding an aura of cold, calculating menace. He was a man made of secrets and sharp edges. Kakashi delivered his report with his usual detached efficiency, detailing the miss. Ion's escalation from a simple escort to a full-blown confrontation with an S-rank missing nin. He described the battle on the bridge, Sasuke's apparent death, and Naruto's subsequent explosion of power. When he got to the Rasengan, however, he paused. Hokage-sama, Kakashi said, his single visible eye turning to Naruto. The technique Naruto used was unprecedented. It was a Rasengan, yes, but its effect was not destructive. It seemed to pacify, to heal. Not the body, but the mind. The heart. Sarutobi leaned forward, his pipe forgotten in its tray. Heal the heart. Explain. Naruto shuffled his feet, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I don't really know how I did it, he stammered, hating how small his voice sounded. I was just really mad. And then I was really sad for Haku. I wanted to beat him. But I didn't want to kill him. I wanted him to understand. When I hit him with the Rasengan, all that feeling just went into it. Danzo stepped forward, his cane tapping once on the wooden floor. The sound was like a gavel falling. You subdued 100 armed mercenaries with a single jutsu by making them feel better. His one visible eye narrowed. Boy, demonstrate this technique. Now. The order was sharp, absolute. Naruto looked at the third, who gave a slight, encouraging nod. He stepped into the center of the room, took a deep breath, and tried to summon the same feeling. He focused, molding his chakra, pushing it into his palm. A standard blue Rasengan sputtered into existence, its familiar screech filling the office. It was powerful, stable even, a testament to the control he'd gained. But it wasn't gold. It held no warmth, no empathetic hum. It was just a tool of destruction. I can't, Naruto said, letting the jutsu dissipate. It's not working. The feeling isn't there. Danzo's eye was cold, dismissive, unreliable, uncontrollable. A power that manifests only during moments of emotional instability is not an asset. It is a liability. He turned to Sarutobi. The boy is a Jinchuriki. His seal may be weakening, allowing the fox's malevolent chakra to influence his own techniques in unpredictable ways. He is a danger to this village. Or, Sarutobi countered, his voice mild but firm, he has developed a new application of ninjutsu that could change the very nature of conflict. We will study this, carefully. He then addressed the other matter. As for Momochi Zabuza and the boy Haku, I have granted them temporary asylum. They will reside in Konoha under Anbu watch and will lend their skills to the village in exchange for protection from Kurigakure's hunter nin. Their knowledge of the Seven Swordsmen and Kiri's internal politics is an invaluable intelligence asset. Danzo's visible eye twitched, the only sign of his displeasure. Giving shelter to enemy shinobi, a soft-hearted and foolish decision, Hiruzen. It will come back to bite you. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the office, his cane tapping a rhythmic, ominous beat. Life in the village settled into a new, strange rhythm. Zabuza and Haku were given a small, secure apartment and put on probation, often assigned to D-rank missions that were beneath their skill but served to keep them occupied and observed. Zabuza endured it with a sullen, simmering silence, while Haku performed every task with a quiet, unnerving grace. He often sought Naruto out, not to talk, but simply to be in his presence, as if Naruto's ambient warmth was a balm to his newly mended soul. For Naruto, the hero's welcome was a gilded cage. He was invited to eat at restaurants that had once thrown him out. But the meals were tense, filled with stilted conversation and fearful glances. He was no longer the pariah, but he wasn't one of them, either. He was something other. Sasuke, meanwhile, threw himself into his training with a frightening intensity. The rivalry between them had shifted. The scorn was gone, replaced by a burning, obsessive need to surpass the boy who had saved him. He would watch Naruto from afar, his Sharingan active, as if trying to dissect the very nature of his power. He would never again be the one who needed saving. He would be the one to do the saving, or the avenging. The line was blurring in his mind. One sweltering afternoon, Naruto was walking past the Hyuga clan compound, a sprawling, immaculate estate that seemed to radiate an aura of cold, rigid tradition. The sound of harsh, rhythmic impacts drew his attention to one of the training yards. Peeking through the wooden slats of the fence, he saw a scene that made his stomach clench. Hinata Hyuga stood in the center of the yard, her pale face streaked with sweat and tears. Opposite her stood her father, Hyuga Hiyashi, his expression a mask of stern disapproval. Neji, her cousin, stood to the side, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Again, Hiyashi commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. Hinata moved, flowing through the complex kata of the gentle fist. Her movements were graceful, precise. But they lacked power. There was a hesitation in her strikes, a deep-seated lack of confidence that permeated her every motion. Pathetic. Hiyashi's voice cut through the air like a whip. You disgrace the main branch. Your strikes are weak. Your spirit is weak. You are not worthy to be my heir. Neji, born to the branch family, possesses more talent in his little finger than you do in your entire body. You are a failure. Each word was a physical blow. Naruto could see Hinata flinch, her shoulders slumping, her chakra faltering. And through the strange, empathetic sense the Kyuubi's chakra had awakened in him, he could feel it. It was a wave of crushing despair, a suffocating blanket of self-loathing and helpless terror. It was the feeling of a bird trapped in a cage, beating its wings against the bars until they were broken and bloody, all while being told it was worthless because it could not fly. The feeling was so painfully familiar it made his own chest ache. It was the loneliness of his apartment, the sting of 1,000 hateful glares, the crushing weight of being judged and found wanting, all condensed into one small, trembling girl. He didn't think. He acted. He vaulted the fence, landing softly in the dusty yard. The air crackled with sudden tension. That's enough, Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. He walked forward, placing himself between the stern clan head and his trembling daughter. He didn't look at Hiyashi. He looked at Hinata, at her wide, tear-filled lavender eyes, and gave her a small, reassuring smile. Hiyashi's eyes, as pale and piercing as Hinata's, narrowed into slits. Uzumaki Naruto, you dare to interfere in the private affairs of the Hyuga clan. You overstep your bounds, boy. I'm overstepping. Naruto's voice rose, the quiet confidence replaced by a simmering anger. You're her father. You're supposed to build her up, not tear her down. What kind of father tells his own daughter she's a failure? I am forging an heir, not coddling a child, Hiyashi stated, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. This is our way. It is a tradition you could not possibly comprehend. Leave now, before you dishonor yourself further. Your tradition stinks. Naruto shot back, his fists clenching. He could feel Hinata's terror behind him, a frantic, fluttering heartbeat. But beneath it, there was a tiny, fragile spark of something else. Hope. Hiyashi's composure finally snapped. Insolent brat, I will teach you the meaning of respect. He moved with blinding speed, his fingers extended in the classic gentle fist stance. He wasn't aiming to kill, merely to disable, to strike a tenketsu point and put the loud-mouthed Jinchuriki in his place. 8 trigrams, body blow. Naruto saw the attack coming, but he didn't dodge. He saw the cold, dismissive look in Hiyashi's eyes, the same look he had seen in the eyes of countless villagers, a look that said you are nothing. He felt Hinata's spirit about to break behind him. And in that moment, the golden chakra answered his call. It surged through him, warm and powerful. He didn't have time to form a full Rasengan. Instead, he channeled the golden energy into his right palm, which began to glow with a soft, sunrise light. As Hiyashi's fingers were about to strike his chest, Naruto met the attack, not with a block, but with an open palm placed gently against Hiyashi's forearm. There was no impact, no shockwave, just contact. The world shattered for Hyuga Hiyashi. It was not a genjutsu. It was far more invasive, far more profound. A torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion. Hinata's emotion flooded his mind. He felt it all, the crushing weight of his expectations, the bone-deep terror of failing him, the desperate, childlike yearning for a single word of praise, a single look of fatherly affection. He felt her shame when she looked at Neji, her feeling of utter inadequacy, her belief that she was a worthless stain on the proud Hyuga name. He was drowning in his daughter's silent suffering. Then came the images. A flash of a small girl, hiding behind her mother's legs, looking up at him with wide, adoring eyes. A memory of his wife. Her face gentle but her eyes filled with a deep, profound disappointment as she watched him berate their daughter for a minor mistake. She has your gentle heart, Hiyashi, her voice echoed in his mind, a memory he had long suppressed. Do not break it in the name of strength. The powerful, unshakable head of the Hyuga clan stumbled back, his perfect composure utterly shattered. He ripped his arm away from Naruto's glowing hand as if he'd been burned. He was panting, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. He looked at Naruto, not with anger, but with a dawning, horrified comprehension. This was no mere Jinchuriki. This boy was a mirror, and the reflection it showed was monstrous. Then, he looked at his daughter. He really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. He didn't see the failed heir, the weak link in a chain of proud warriors. He saw a terrified child, her pale face streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wide with a pain he had just personally and intimately experienced. The weight of his own cruelty settled on him like a shroud. Wordlessly, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly, Hiyashi Hyuga turned and strode away, disappearing into the cold, silent halls of the main house. Neji stared, his own mask of bored superiority cracked. He had felt the ripple of Naruto's chakra, had seen his uncle, the strongest man he knew, recoil as if struck by a ghost. He looked from Naruto's still glowing hand to his cousin, then back again, a storm of confusion and reluctant respect warring in his eyes. He too turned and left, leaving the two of them alone in the suddenly quiet yard. The golden glow faded from Naruto's hand. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He turned to Hinata, who was staring at him with her wide, lavender eyes, a mixture of awe, terror, and something fragile and new blooming within them. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, fresh tears welling up and spilling down her cheeks. These weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of release. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to light up the whole yard. He held out his hand. "Come on, let's get you out of here. I'll buy you some ramen. My treat." Hinata looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, as if it were a life raft in a stormy sea. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took it. His hand was warm and strong, and as her fingers touched his, she felt a sense of peace settle over her for the first time in as long as she could remember. The cage was still there, but for the first time, he could see that the door had been unlocked. In the land of perpetual shadow, the man in the weeping eye mask, Kageyama, knelt before his altar. The surge of positive energy from Konoha had been sharp, focused, and potent. It was like a surgeon's scalpel of light, lancing a boil of despair. It was targeted, precise, and utterly infuriating. "The Jinchuriki is more nuanced than I anticipated," he whispered to the cold, silent stone. "He does not merely radiate hope. He weaponizes it." This was a development that required a more delicate touch. A blunt instrument would not suffice. "Send for Tayuya," he commanded to the empty air. A shadow detached itself from the corner of the room, bowed, and melted away. "Her gift for sound and psychological warfare will be a perfect test for our little beacon of light. Let us see how his harmony fares against a symphony of despair." He looked at the altar, a faint, cruel smile playing on his hidden lips. "Let's see if his heart can be healed when we fill it with nothing but noise." The hunt had begun. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. A Symphony of Discord. The ramen at Ichiraku was a sacred thing. To Naruto, it was the taste of home, of acceptance, Furuka-sensei's kindness after a long day of being shunned. It was a panacea for all of life's ills. Today, however, it tasted like victory. He watched, a wide grin plastered on his face, as Hinata Hyuga, the girl who used to faint if he looked at her for too long, tentatively slurped a mouthful of noodles. A little broth splashed onto her cheek, and instead of turning crimson with embarrassment, she simply wiped it away with the back of her hand and continued eating. It was, in Naruto's estimation, the single bravest act he had ever witnessed. "So," he prodded, halfway through his own jumbo-sized bowl of miso pork. "Best in the world, right?" Hinata finished her mouthful, chewing thoughtfully. She looked up from her bowl, her pale lavender eyes meeting his directly. There was no stutter, no blush, just a quiet, profound sincerity. "It's very warm, Naruto-kun. Thank you for bringing me here." It was the most she'd ever said to him in one go. He was so surprised he almost choked on a slice of fish cake. He saw Tyuki, the old man behind the counter, raise a bushy eyebrow in approval. Even the ramen guy knew this was a momentous occasion. Of course, anytime. Naruto beamed. You know, you're way stronger than your dad gives you credit for. The way you stood up to him back there, that was awesome. Hinata blinked, a flicker of the old uncertainty in her eyes. But, I didn't do anything. You were the one who. Nah, he interrupted, waving his chopsticks dismissively. I just opened the door. You were the one who had to be brave enough to even think about walking through it. That's the hard part. She looked down at her bowl, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. For the first time, she wasn't just the weird, shy Hyuga girl in his mind. She was Hinata, a person, a friend. The feeling was simple, clean, and warm. He was beginning to realize that the golden chakra didn't just flow out of him. Helping people, connecting with them like this, seemed to replenish it, making the world feel a little brighter. A little less lonely for everyone, himself included. This simple peace, however, was a luxury Konoha could not afford. The moment Naruto stepped into the Hokage Tower the next morning, summoned by a grim-faced Anbu, he knew the other shoe was about to drop. The Hokage's office was thick with tension. Hiruzen sat behind his desk, looking 100 years old. On either side of him stood Homura Mitokado and Kaharu Utatane, the village elders, their faces etched with disapproval. And in the corner, a silent statue of judgment, stood Danzo. Naruto Uzumaki, Kaharu began. Her voice as sharp and brittle as old parchment. We have received a formal complaint from the Hyuga clan council. You are accused of trespassing on clan grounds, interfering in a private training matter, and assaulting the clan head, Hyuga Hiyashi. Naruto's jaw dropped. Assault. I didn't even hit him. He attacked me. A fact Hiyashi Dono does not deny, Hiruzen said, his voice heavy with weariness. He gestured to a scroll on his desk. His personal testimony is confusing. He claims you used an unknown jutsu that forced him to experience his daughter's emotions. He has since secluded himself for meditation and reflection, and has refused to see the clan elders. Danzo stepped forward, his one eye fixing on Naruto with an unnerving intensity. You see, Hiruzen, the boy's power is a political incendiary bomb. He has publicly humbled the head of one of Konoha's most noble and powerful clans. This is not strength, it is chaos. He has destabilized a cornerstone of this village's power structure with a single emotional outburst. I was just trying to help Hinata. Naruto protested, his voice rising. He was hurting her. He called her a failure. The internal traditio NS of the great clans are not for an orphan of no lineage to judge, Homura stated coldly. Your actions were reckless and have caused a significant diplomatic incident within our own walls. Enough, Hiruzen said, holding up a hand. The authority in his voice, though quiet, silenced the room. Naruto, I do not doubt your intentions were good. But your power, this ability to manipulate the hearts of others, is a dangerous and unprecedented tool. You cannot wield it like a kunai, throwing it at every problem you see. Do you understand the gravity of this? Naruto looked at their faces, the elders, stern disapproval. Danzo's cold ambition, the Hokage's weary concern. They weren't talking about helping Hinata. They were talking about politics, about power, about stability. They were talking about his power as a thing to be managed, contained, and controlled, just like the Kyuubi. For a moment, the gilded cage felt very small and very, very real. I understand, he said, his voice flat. He understood that they were afraid. And he understood, with a sinking feeling, that Danzo wasn't just afraid, he saw an opportunity. He was dismissed, a quiet warning to stay away from the Hyuga compound hanging in the air. As he walked through the village, the cheerful morning atmosphere felt off. There was a subtle static in the air, an undercurrent of irritability he couldn't quite place. To me, our chants were shouting at each other over the price of a tomato with a venom usually reserved for life or death situations. A child wailed inconsolably in its mother's arms, refusing to be soothed. The normal, ambient emotional hum of the village, a thing he was only just learning to perceive, felt grating and dissonant, like 1,000 out-of-tune instruments playing at once. He shook his head, blaming it on the stressful meeting. He didn't see the source of the discord. Perched atop a high roof, hidden from sight, a girl with fiery red hair and a punk rock aesthetic smirked as she lowered a complex, metal flute from her lips. Chiyuya of the Sound 4. Her eyes, narrowed in concentration, scanned the village below. She wasn't playing a melody. She was playing a frequency, a subsonic wave of pure, refined irritation designed to fray nerves and shorten tempers. It was a low-level, wide-area application of her sound genjutsu, a way of poisoning the well. Kageyama-sama had ordered her to test the Jinchuriki, to see if his harmony could withstand a symphony of pure, unadulterated spite. Her orders were to probe, not to attack directly. She needed a focal point, a target close to the boy. Someone whose emotional state she could manipulate and amplify into a weapon. And Kageyama-sama, through his own dark arts, had given her the perfect one, the broken little bird from the Hyuga cage. Hinata was at a secluded training ground, one reserved for the main family. She was alone, trying to replicate the forms her father had demanded of her. But something was different. The movements felt stronger, more fluid. The memory of Naruto's hand in hers, of his simple, unconditional belief in her, was a small, warm flame in her chest. For the first time, she was training not out of fear of her father, but for herself. For the hope that one day, she could stand beside the boy who had shown her the sky. A sound, soft and melodious, drifted through the trees. A single, mournful flute note. It was beautiful, captivating. Hinata paused, listening. The melody seemed to call to her, to understand the years of quiet sadness she had carried. It was a song of loneliness, of being misunderstood. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. And then, the melody began to twist. A new note, discordant and sharp, wove its way in. The beautiful sadness curdled into something ugly, self-pity. The melody shifted again, becoming a frantic, mocking tune. Failure, a voice whispered in her mind, a perfect imitation of her father's. Pathetic. You disgrace the Hyuga name. Hinata's eyes snapped open. The training ground was empty. But the voice was inside her head, as real as her own thoughts. You didn't do anything. Neji's cool, condescending voice joined the chorus. The Jinchuriki saved you. You are weak. You will always be weak. A burden to everyone around you. The flute music intensified, the notes becoming jagged shards of sound that seemed to tear at her sanity. The small flame of hope in her chest flickered, battered by a hurricane of her deepest fears. The training ground around her dissolved, replaced by a dark, warped version of the Hyuga dojo. Her father stood before her, his Byakugan eyes glowing with contempt. Neji stood beside him, laughing. Countless other Hyuga clansmen, their faces twisted in scorn, pointed at her, their whispers a deafening roar. Failure. Weakling. Disgrace. He didn't save you. He pitied you. No one could ever truly care for someone so worthless. Hinata screamed, clutching her head as she fell to her knees. The genjutsu was perfect, a prison built from her own trauma. With the flute's melody as the jailer, Naruto felt it like a physical blow. He was walking with Sakura, trying to explain the weird feeling he was getting from the village, when a sudden, piercing shriek of pure, psychic terror sliced through the ambient noise. It was Hinata's emotional signature, a beacon of fragile hope that was being violently, horribly extinguished. Hinata. He didn't explain. He just ran. He followed the feeling, a desperate homing beacon of pain leading him to the training ground. He burst through the trees to find her on the ground, writhing. Her hands clawing at her temples, her eyes wide and unseeing, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't perceive. And perched on a branch above her, a red-haired girl held a flute to her lips, a cruel, triumphant smirk on her face. Well, Chiyuya sneered, her voice raspy and arrogant. Look what the cat dragged in. The hero of the hour. Come to watch the little bird's mind shatter. I gotta say, for a Hyuga, her psyche is pathetically easy to crack. All I had to do was play her own greatest hits back at her. Get out of her head. Naruto roared, raw, golden chakra flaring to life around him. Make me, you orange freak. Chiyuya taunted, and played a sharp, piercing trill on her flute. Demonic flute. Phantom sound chains. Invisible chains of pure sound shot out, wrapping around Naruto. They didn't bind his body. They sank into his mind. The golden chakra around him sputtered as a wave of nausea and vertigo washed over him. The world tilted, the trees seeming to melt and warp. Her sound was a direct assault on the senses, a brutal counter to his own emotionally attuned power. He fought against it, pushing his own chakra out, creating a warm, resonant hum to counter her grating frequency. The two forces met in the air between them, an invisible war of energies. It was a stalemate. He could protect himself, but he couldn't break her hold on Hinata. He had to get closer. He formed a Rasengan, the standard blue one, and charged. Chiyuya leapt back effortlessly, never breaking her melody. From the ground, three massive, grotesque figures emerged, summoned by her will. Doki, mindless brutes that moved to intercept him. He slammed his Rasengan into the first one, obliterating its upper torso, but the other two were on him, their massive fists forcing him back. This was a losing battle. He couldn't fight them and Chiyuya at the same time, not while her genjutsu was tearing Hinata apart. He needed a new approach. He couldn't overpower the sound. So, he wouldn't try. He dged a blow from a doki and looked at Hinata, at her pale, agonized face. He focused not on the fight, not on Chiyuya, but on Hinata's flickering emotional signature. It was a tiny candle flame in a hurricane, about to be snuffed out. He poured all of his will, all of his warmth, all of his belief in her, into his chakra. He brought his hands together, not in a seal, but as if he were cupping something precious. He began to form a Rasengan, but this one was different. He didn't let it grow violent. He fed it his golden chakra, molding it, calming it. It didn't screech. It hummed, a single, perfect, resonant tone. It was a sphere not of churning power, but of pure, unwavering harmony. Rasengan. Resonance, he whispered. He held the glowing, humming sphere in his hands. It wasn't a projectile, it was a tuning fork. And he was going to tune Hinata's heart back to his own. He closed his eyes and pushed his consciousness into the golden sphere, following the thread of his connection to Hinata. He wasn't trying to break the genjutsu from the outside. He was going in. The world dissolved into darkness and noise. He was inside the genjutsu, a disembodied presence in the nightmare landscape of Hinata's mind. He saw her, a small child again, curled on the floor of the dojo while the monstrous figures of her father and clan loomed over her, their accusations of physical, crushing weight. Hinata. His voice echoed through the darkness, not as a sound, but as a feeling. A feeling of warmth, of ramen, of a hand held out in friendship. The child Hinata looked up, her lavender eyes wide with terror and a dawning. Impossible hope. A golden light began to emanate from Naruto's spectral form, the pure hum of his resonance jutsu pushing back against the cacophony of Chiyuya's flute. The monstrous figures flickered, their voices faltering. Chiyuya felt it immediately. Her genjutsu was being corrupted from the inside out. It was like someone was broadcasting a pirate radio signal of pure, syrupy friendship over her carefully crafted station of despair. It was infuriating. Her flute music grew shriller, more desperate, pouring more power into the illusion. In the genjutsu, the darkness fought back. But Naruto wasn't fighting the darkness. He was walking towards Hinata. They're wrong. His voice resonated through her mind. You're not weak. You're the strongest person I know. Get up, Hinata. He held out a hand of golden light. She reached for it, her small, trembling fingers stretching out. The moment she touched him, the golden light exploded outwards. In the real world, the humming Rasengan in Naruto's hands pulsed once, brilliantly. A wave of pure, harmonious energy washed over the clearing. Chiyuya's flute music was drowned out, her frequency shattered. The genjutsu broke like glass. Chiyuya staggered back, clutching her head. The psychic backlash was immense. Her own jutsu had been turned against her, flooding her mind with a sickeningly sweet wave of courage and friendship. It felt like being force-fed a gallon of honey. She snarled, a string of curses spilling from her lips. This ain't over, you damn orange Pollyanna. She spat, and with a burst of speed, vanished into the trees. Her doki summons dissolved into smoke. Naruto fell to one knee, the resonance jutsu dissipating. It had taken almost everything he had. He was panting, drained, but he was smiling. Hinata blinked, the real training ground slowly coming back into focus. The terrible voices were gone. All that remained was the echo of Naruto's warmth. She looked at him, kneeling nearby, looking utterly exhausted but grinning at her. He had come for her. He had walked into her darkest nightmare and led her out by the hand. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in this terrible day, they were her own. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking but holding. "Naruto-kun," she said, her voice quiet but clear as a bell, free of any tremor. "Thank you. Now, please, teach me how to be that strong." He looked up at her, at the fierce, unwavering determination that had replaced the fear in her eyes. This wasn't the girl he had saved. This was a girl who had faced her own soul and had chosen to fight. He had opened the door, but she had just taken her first, defiant step through it, all on her own. He grinned, a tired but triumphant expression. "You got it." He knew then that this new enemy, the one who sent people like Tayuya, was different. They didn't want to kill him. They wanted to break him. They wanted to extinguish his light by turning the people he cared about into weapons of despair. And he would not let them. He would make his friends so strong, their own inner light would burn away any shadow that dared to touch them. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Promise. Training with Hinata was unlike anything Naruto had ever experienced. It wasn't about sparring until one of them dropped from exhaustion, the way he did with Sasuke or even Kakashi. It was more like emotional architecture. He was helping her rebuild her confidence from the ground up, and his chakra was the scaffolding. They stood in the same training ground where he'd found her trapped in her nightmare. This time, however, the air was clear and filled with the thrum of cicadas, not the echo of painful memories. 10 of Naruto's shadow clones stood in a circle around Hinata, their forms shimmering slightly with a faint, golden aura. "Okay, Hinata, just like we practiced," the real Naruto said, sitting cross-legged on a nearby log. "Don't think about your father. Don't think about Neji. Just feel the flow. Show him what you've got." Hinata took a deep, centering breath, her lavender eyes closing for a moment. She settled into the opening stance of the gentle fist, her posture a perfect blend of poised grace and newfound solidity. When she opened her eyes, the timid uncertainty was gone, replaced by a calm, focused intensity. Byakugan. The veins around her temples bulged as her Kekkei Genkai activated, granting her a near 360-degree field of vision and the ability to see the chakra pathway system. She saw the 10 clones not just as physical targets, but as constellations of pure, warm energy. She moved. It was a dance of devastating precision. She flowed between the clones, her palms striking out like a hummingbird's wings. Each strike was a perfect gentle fist attack, aimed precisely at a tenketsu, a chakra network node. But instead of the usual crippling effect, the result was bizarre. The moment her palm connected with a golden clone, two things happened. First, the clone burst in a puff of smoke, its purpose served. Second, a gentle pulse of the clone's warm, golden chakra flowed back up Hinata's arm, directly into her own chakra network. It wasn't a jolt or a shock. It was a feeling, a whisper of encouragement, a surge of validation. It was the psychic equivalent of a coach shouting, "Great shot." Directly into her soul, confidence, strength. "You can do this." With each clone she struck, the feeling amplified. The hesitation that had plagued her for years, the voice in her head that told her she would fail, was being systematically drowned out by a chorus of pure, unadulterated positive reinforcement. Her movements became faster, sharper, more certain. The final strike, a spinning palm heel that dissipated the last clone, was delivered with an audible ki. A shout of fierce, unburdened power that came from deep within her chest. She stood panting in the center of the clearing, her Byakugan deactivated, a sheen of sweat on her brow. She looked at her own hands. A slow look of wonder spreading across her face. She had never felt so capable, so strong. "See." Naruto's voice was filled with pride. "You're not weak, Hinata. You just needed to get out of your own way." Quote. She looked at him, and the smile she gave him was brilliant, like the sun breaking through a lifetime of clouds. "Thank you, Naruto-kun." From the dense canopy of a nearby tree, a pair of dark eyes watched, a single tomo spinning in each. Sasuke Uchiha observed the entire exchange with a growing sense of turmoil. This was not training as he understood it. There was no pain, no struggle, no clawing for more power through sheer grit and hatred. Naruto was nurturing strength in another person. He was using his chakra not to destroy, but to build. And it was working. He saw the new, unshakable confidence in Hinata, a girl he had barely ever noticed before. A bitter, acidic jealousy coiled in his gut, while he was pushing his body to the breaking point, trying to master the Chidori. A jutsu of pure, lethal force, Naruto was inventing an entirely new discipline, one that seemed to defy the very principles of the shinobi world. It made his own quest for power feel brutish, unrefined, and it terrified him. The gap between them was no longer just about raw power, it was becoming a vast, ideological chasm, and he felt himself standing on the wrong side of it. Their unorthodox training did not go unnoticed. The Hyuga elders, already in an uproar over Hiyashi's self-imposed seclusion, saw it as a direct challenge to their authority. A main branch heir, their future leader, was being trained by the village pariah, the Jinchuriki, in a manner that defied all their sacred traditions. It was an intolerable breach of protocol. The complaint I led landed on the third Hokage's desk with the weight of an ultimatum. This time, Danzo Shimura did not wait for a formal meeting. He acted. Haku was arranging a simple bouquet of wildflowers in a va. Say in the small apartment he shared with Zabuza when the door slid open without a knock. He turned, a gentle smile on his face, expecting Naruto. Instead, 5 figures in the blank white masks and CK cloaks of root Anbu stood in the doorway. They moved with a silent, unnerving synchronicity, their bodies devoid of any readable emotion. By order of Danzo-sama, the lead operative stated, his voice a dead, toneless monotone. Zabuza Momochi and Haku Yuki are to be transferred to a more secure facility for the continued safety of Konohagakure. Zabuza emerged from the back room, his hand instinctively reaching for the kubikiribocho that leaned against the wall. He had faced down armies and Cage, but there was something deeply unsettling about these emotionless shinobi. They were like puppets, their strings pulled by an unseen master. I was not aware the Hokage had issued such an order, Zabuza growled, his one visible eye narrowing. The Hokage's orders are not our concern, the operative replied, his head tilting slightly. Lord Danzo's will is absolute. You will come with us. Resistance will be corrected. The threat was unspoken but perfectly clear. Haku placed a calming hand on Zabuza's arm. They were guests in this village, under asylum. To resist would be to declare themselves enemies again. And besides, these were not men they could reason with. There was nothing behind their eyes to appeal to. With a final, disgusted snarl, Zabuza relented. They were led from their apartment, not as guests, but as prisoners. The news reached Naruto an hour later via a frantic sack. Urahu had seen them being escorted from a distance. The word, Danzo, was all he needed to hear. He felt a cold dread mixed with a hot surge of anger. He had made a promise on that bridge. He had shown Haku a different way to live, and Zabuza a different kind of power. Danzo's secure facility was a place where hearts were not healed, but broken, dissected, and reforged into tools. He would be undoing everything Naruto had fought for. It was a personal, ideological attack. He stormed to the Hokage Tower, bypassing all protocol and bursting into the office. The third was there, along with the 2 elders. Danzo was not. Where are they? Naruto demanded, his voice echoing in the round room. Hiruzen sighed, the lines on his face deepening. Naruto, this is a matter of internal security. Danzo has invoked his authority as head of Root. He believes Zabuza's presence is a destabilizing factor, especially given the current tensions with the Hyuga. That's a lie, Naruto shot back. This isn't about security, it's about him. He hates that I helped them. He hates that they're not just weapons anymore. Your help is the very thing that has caused this instability. Koharu snapped. You have meddled in affairs beyond your station. Danzo is simply cleaning up your mess. Zabuza and Haku are in this village because of me, Naruto said, his voice dropping, his anger solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. They put their trust in Konoha because I showed them something worth trusting. If you let him take them, that trust means nothing. Our word means nothing. He looked directly at Hiruzen, his blue eyes blazing. I made them a promise. I won't let them be turned back into tools. Not by him. Not by anyone. He didn't wait for a reply. He turned on his heel and walked out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He knew what he had to do. Obeying the elders meant sacrificing his friends and his own principles. Defying them meant risking everything. There was no choice at all. He found them easily enough. His heightened senses, a gift of the Kyuubi's chakra, could feel Haku's calm, clear emotional signature, a beacon in the sea of Konoha's citizens. A small convoy of 4 ROT operatives was escorting Zabuza and Haku, both bound in chakra-suppressing cuffs, through a little-used network of tunnels beneath the village, heading towards the grim, unmarked entrance to Root's headquarters. Naruto dropped down from a grate in the ceiling, landing silently in the tunnel ahead of them. "That's far enough," he said. The Root operatives stopped. Their masked faces turned towards him in perfect unison. There was no surprise, no anger. Just cold, robotic assessment. "Naruto Uzumaki," the leader stated. "You are interfering with official Root business. Stand down or be neutralized." "I don't think so," Naruto replied. He held out his hand, and a golden Rasengan hummed to life, its warm light pushing back the oppressive gloom of the tunnel. He expected a fight. He expected taijutsu, kunai, ninjutsu. He didn't expect what happened next. From behind him, a flurry of shuriken and senbon rained down on the Root operatives. They moved to block, but they were a fraction of a second too slow. 2 of them grunted and fell, not dead, but disabled, senbon striking precise nerve clusters. Hinata, her Byakugan blazing, dropped down from another grate, her face a mask of fierce determination. Beside her landed Sasuke, his Sharingan spinning, a cynical smirk on his face. "You're a real idiot, rushing in here alone," Sasuke said, though there was no heat in it. "But I owe Danzo for a few things myself. Consider this a temporary alliance." Hinata said nothing, simply settling into her gentle fist stance, her eyes scanning the remaining operatives, her confidence unwavering. Naruto was too stunned to speak for a moment, then a wide grin split his face. He wasn't alone. The 2 remaining Root operatives assessed the new threats. Their programming was clear. The mission was compromised. Capture was secondary to containment. One of them made a series of hand signs, his target not Naruto, but Zabuza. A paralysis jutsu. Naruto saw the intent. He wasn't going to fight them. Fighting them was what they wanted. He let the golden Rasengan in his palm expand, the hum growing into a deep, resonant tone. He slammed it not at an enemy, but onto the stone floor of the tunnel. Rasengan. Harmony. The wave of pure, positive emotional energy that had pacified an army of thugs washed through the confined space. But the effect on the Root Anbu was completely different. They didn't have happy memories to be overwhelmed by. They had no greed or malice to be pacified. Their minds were blank slates, their emotions chemically and psychologically suppressed since childhood. Naruto's jutsu didn't give them something they lacked. It simply switched everything back on. The result was catastrophic. For the 2 operatives, it was like a lifetime of suppressed fear, confusion, anger, and sorrow hit them all at once. It was a tsunami of raw, unprocessed sensation flooding a mind that had been trained for absolute silence. One operative collapsed, screaming, clutching his head, as fragmented memories of a forgotten childhood flashed behind his eyes. The other stumbled back, his body shaking uncontrollably, looking at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger, the absolute certainty of his entire existence shattering into a million pieces. In the chaos, Sasuke and Hinata moved. Sasuke's wire-thin ninja rope wrapped around the key to the cuffs, yanking it free. Hinata struck the cuffed hands of Zabuza and Haku with a precise gentle fist strike, not to damage them, but to create a chakra pulse that momentarily disrupted the cuffs, suppression long enough for them to be unlocked. They were free. Zabuza flexed his hands, a low growl in his throat as he looked at the 2 gibbering Root shinobi on the ground. For a moment, Naruto saw the old demon of the mist surface, the urge to kill. "Don't," Naruto said, his voice quiet. He looked at the broken operatives with something akin to pity. "They're not the real enemy." Zabuza looked from the pathetic Anbu to Naruto. Then to the Uchiha and the Hyuga who had come to his aid. He had stayed in Konoha to understand this boy's strange power. He had expected to observe it from a safe, clinical distance. He had never expected that power. And the boy wielding it, to reach out and pull him from the jaws of a trap. He had lived his life by the shinobi code. Look out for yourself, use others, and discard them when they are no longer useful. Naruto was actively defying that code, risking his own standing in the village for two former enemies. It was the most illogical, inefficient, and profoundly powerful thing Zabuza had ever witnessed. He looked at Naruto, a new understanding dawning in his eye. "You keep your promises, brat." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. A sign of grudging, absolute respect. In his subterranean office, surrounded by darkness and the sterile silence of his order, Danzo Shimura stared at a blank wall. The report lay on the desk before him. Mission failed. Operatives, compromised. Their minds had been shattered not by a destructive force, but by an emotional one. They were useless now, broken things. He had underestimated the nature of the Jinchuriki's power. It was not a weapon that could be met with force or discipline. It was a fundamental corruption of the shinobi ideal. It spread like a virus, turning a Hyuga heir defiant and an Uchiha survivor unpredictable. Direct confrontation was a fool's errand. He needed a different kind of weapon. One that fought fire not with water, but with a more potent, more corrupting flame. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a single, thin file. It was old, dusty, and filled with the spidery, arrogant script of his former colleague. The file was labeled, Orochimaru. Subject: Cursed Seal of Heaven. The research detailed a method of forcibly injecting a subject with malevolent senjutsu chakra, amplifying their negative emotions, their ambition, their rage, their hatred, and turning it into raw, intoxicating power. It was the perfect antithesis to Naruto's healing light. You couldn't heal a heart that was ecstatically, addictively embracing its own darkness. Danzo looked at a second, much newer file on his desk. On it was a picture of Sasuke Uchiha. The boy was the perfect candidate. A heart already primed with hatred and a thirst for power. All he needed was a push. A catalyst. Danzo picked up a brush and wrote a coded message. An invitation. It was time for the snake to return to the nest. He would let Orochimaru give Sasuke the power he craved, and in doing so, he would create a monster that Naruto's gentle harmony could never hope to tame. Let the Jinchuriki try to heal a wound that festered with the sweet poison of power. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Serpent's Mark. The aftermath of the rescue was a quiet, suffocating storm. There were no public reprimands, no official punishments. Instead, Team 7 was sidelined. They were assigned a string of the most mind-numbing D-rank missions imaginable: weeding gardens, painting fences, walking the Inuzuka clan's Ninken. It was a clear, unspoken message from the village's highest echelons. They were on probation. Naruto's heroic defiance was being treated as a childish tantrum. And this was his time out. The political blowback was invisible to most of the village, but Naruto felt its effects keenly. Hyuga clansmen would turn their backs when he walked by, their pale eyes radiating a cold, unified disapproval. Some of the more conservative Jonin would look at Kakashi with a mixture of pity and contempt for his inability to control his problem student. Danzo's root operatives were a more frequent, if unseen, presence in the village, their emotionless chakra signatures flickering at the edges of Naruto's perception like ghosts in the machine. He had won the battle in the tunnels, but in the war of whispers and influence, he was losing badly. He found his new counsel in the one place he had always found solace, atop the Hokage monument. Sitting on the fourth Hokage's stone head and looking out over the village. Zabuza, Haku, and a reluctant Hinata had joined him, the four of them forming a strange, insular pocket of defiance against the village's simmering disapproval. "This is a fool's game, brat," Zabuza rumbled, his arms crossed as he stared down at the Hokage tower. He had foregone his usual bandages, revealing a face that was surprisingly sharp and scarred. "You're trying to play shogi with men who have been masters of the board since before you were born. Your heart is your greatest weapon, but in their world, it's a liability. So I should just let them walk all over us. Let them decide who's a person and who's a tool." Naruto shot back, kicking his feet against the stone. "No," Haku said, his voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. He sat beside Naruto, his presence a soothing counterpoint to Zabuza's abrasive energy. "What Zabuza-sama means is that you cannot fight them on their terms. You are the sun, Naruto-san. You inspire and you heal. But the sun cannot see into the dark corners where spiders spin their webs. That requires a different kind of eye." Naruto looked at them. Zabuza, the former demon of the mist. a master of silent killing and psychological warfare. Haku, a peerless tracker and assassin with a keen, analytical mind. And Hinata, whose Byakugan could see through lies, walls, and flesh with equal ease. They weren't just his friends. They were a collection of skills he desperately lacked. Hinata, sensing his gaze, spoke up, her voice soft but steady. The Hyuga elders they are afraid, Naruto-kun. My father's seclusion has created a power vacuum, and your actions have introduced an element of chaos they cannot control. They see you as a threat to our clan's purity, to its traditions. I'm the heart, Naruto murmured, Zabuza's words clicking into place. And you guys, you're the teeth, the eyes, the hands. He looked at them, a slow, determined grin spreading across his face. I can't fight Danzo in the shadows. I don't know how, but you do. Zabuza let out a short, harsh laugh. It was a sound of pure, cynical respect. So that's your plan. You want us to be your own personal Anbu. Your shield against the darkness. I want you to be my friends, Naruto corrected him, his expression utterly serious. And friends watch each other's backs. A new understanding settled between them. It wasn't a formal declaration, but a quiet, unbreakable pact. They would be his shadow council, his intelligence network, his first line of defense against the political machinations he could neither see nor comprehend. Their loyalty was not to the village, not to a system that had cast them all out in one way or another. It was to him. Their quiet rebellion was erupted by a proclamation that swept through the village like a wildfire. The Chunin exams were coming to Konoha. For the first time in years, the village would be flooded with genin from Sunagakure, Iwagakure, Kumogakure, and a host of smaller villages, including the newly established Otogakure, the village hidden in the sound. For most genin, it was a chance for promotion and glory. For Team 7, it was a lifeline. It was a chance to prove, on an international stage, that their power was an asset, not a liability. If they excelled, not even the elders could deny their worth. Kakashi nominated them without hesitation, his one visible eye conveying a simple message: don't screw this up. The second stage of the exams took place in the 44th training ground, better known as the Forest of Death. It was a sprawling, primordial jungle sealed within massive walls, filled with monstrous creatures, poisonous plants, and a palpable sense of dread. The objective was simple. Each team was given either a heaven or an earth scroll. They had 5 days to fight their way to the tower in the center of the forest with a complete pair. Team 7 moved with a grim efficiency that spoke of their recent trials. Sasuke was their vanguard, his Sharingan piercing the gloom. Sakura, her mind sharp and her senses honed, was their analyst, identifying threats and navigating traps. And Naruto, his sensory abilities now finely tuned, was their compass, feeling the emotional signatures of other teams, warning them of ambushes long before they sprang. They secured an earth scroll from a trio of hapless rain ninja within the first hour. A testament to their skill and coordination. They were resting near a massive, gnarled tree when the atmosphere changed. The normal sounds of the forest, the chittering of insects, the rustling of unseen creatures, died away, replaced by an unnatural, suffocating silence. A cold, slithering presence seemed to bleed from the very soil, a feeling of ancient malice and predatory curiosity. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, his body thrumming with golden chakra. Someone's coming, he whispered, his eyes wide. And they feel wrong. Cold, a gust of wind, heavy and foul, swept through the clearing. And then he was there, leaning against a tree trunk as if he had been part of it all along. He was tall and pale, with golden eyes slit like a snake's and a long, dark curtain of hair. His face was androgynously beautiful, and it was stretched in a thin, predatory smile. He wore the headband of the Sound Village, but the aura of power that rolled off him in waves was far older and more terrible than any minor village. My, the figure hissed, his voice a silken, chilling sound. His impossibly long tongue darted out to lick his lips. What an interesting collection of little birds. The last Uchiha, bristling with such delicious hatred. The Jinchuriki, glowing like a little sun. And a pink-haired distraction. Sakura flinched, but Sasuke stepped in front of her, a kunai in his hand, his Sharingan blazing to life. Who are you? The man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. A humble shinobi from the Sound, here to take your scroll. But I am always on the lookout for new talent. His golden, slitted eyes fixed on Sasuke, and the predatory hunger in them was palpable. Such wonderful potential in those eyes. Such a perfect vessel for power, stewing in a broth of trauma and revenge. A prodigy, just like his brother. The mention of Itachi was a key in a lock. Sasuke's composure shattered, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. He charged, a blur of motion. Don't you dare speak his name. The fight was over before it began. The Sound ninja, Orochimaru, moved with a fluid, serpentine grace that was utterly inhuman. He evaded Sasuke's frantic assault with contemptuous ease, his body seeming to bend and stretch in impossible ways. He disarmed him with a flick of the wrist and sent him crashing into a tree with a casual backhand. Pathetic, Orochimaru hissed, his smile widening. Your hatred is a fine jewel, but you have no idea how to wield it. You are still just a child playing with his father's swords. Naruto roared, the Kyuubi's power surging. Mixing with his own golden chakra. He formed a Rasengan and charged, the ground cracking beneath his feet. Orochimaru's eyes widened with genuine, scientific curiosity. Ah, this is the power that vexed Kageyama's little songbird. Fascinating. He didn't try to block the Rasengan. He simply opened his mouth to an impossible width and his neck elongated, stretching like rubber, his head rocketing forward to meet Naruto's charge. His fangs, long and sharp as daggers, sank into Naruto's shoulder. An agonizing, fiery pain spread through Naruto's body as a foreign, malevolent chakra was injected directly into his system. The Rasengan in his hand sputtered and died. At the same time, Orochimaru flicked his wrist. A single Senbon, glowing with a faint purple light, shot out and struck Sasuke in the neck. Sasuke gasped, his body seizing up, his Sharingan deactivating. Sakura, paralyzed by fear for a moment, finally acted, hurling a volley of kunai with explosive tags attached. Or, Akimaru simply let them detonate against his body, which dissolved into a heap of mud. A clone. The real Orochimaru emerged from the ground behind a trembling Sasuke, his arms wrapping around the boy in a grotesque, possessive embrace. Don't worry, little Uchiha, he whispered into Sasuke's ear, his voice dripping with seductive poison. I am not here to kill you. I am here to give you a gift. A key that will unlock the power you crave. The power you need to kill him. His neck elongated again. He turned Sasuke's head to the side, exposing the skin just below his ear, and bit down hard. Sasuke screamed, a raw, agonized sound that was abruptly cut off. His body arched in a silent convulsion as three black tomo, like a twisted mockery of his own Sharingan, swirled into existence on his skin, forming a dark, cursed mark. Naruto, fighting against the paralyzing poison in his veins, could only watch in horror. He could feel the mark. It was a nexus of pure, concentrated malice. It was a living entity of hatred and ambition. A parasite that fed on negative emotion. It was the absolute, perfect antithesis of his own power. Orochimaru let the now unconscious Sasuke drop to the ground. He turned to Naruto, a triumphant, clinical smile on his face. There now, a seed of true power, planted in fertile soil. Let's see which grows stronger, little son. Your gentle light, or my delicious darkness. With a final, mocking chuckle, he sank into the trunk of the tree and vanished, leaving behind only the oppressive silence and the scent of snakes. Naruto finally managed to force his body to move, crawling over to Sasuke. Sakura was already there, her face a mask of terror and confusion. The black marks on Sasuke's neck pulsed with a faint, dark energy. Get away from him, Sakura shrieked as Naruto reached out a hand. I can help him, Naruto insisted, ignoring her protest. He placed his hand over the cursed seal, and for the first time, he tried to actively heal a wound of the heart. He poured his golden chakra into the mark, the warm, harmonious energy that had mended Haku's spirit and pacified an army. The result was violent. The moment his chakra touched the seal, the black tomo spun wildly. Instead of being pushed back or purified, the seal seemed to feed on the emotional energy, twisting it, corrupting it. Naruto felt a psychic backlash that threw him back. It was a torrent of pure, undiluted malice. A taste of Orochimaru's own twisted soul, amplified by Sasuke's own simmering hatred for his brother. It was a vision of power for power's sake, of ambition without limits. Of a world where bonds were merely tools and emotions were weaknesses to be exploited or fuel for a greater fire. The seal wasn't a wound. A wound could be closed. This was a seed of darkness that had been planted deep in Sasuke's soul, and Naruto's light was only making it grow faster. He could soothe the immediate pain, he could feel his chakra containing the seal spread for a moment, but he couldn't remove it. He couldn't heal it. He slumped back, drained and horrified. He had found a darkness his light couldn't banish, a wound his power couldn't mend, and it was festering in the heart of his best friend. Miles away, in a hidden lair, Orochimaru wiped a trickle of blood from his lip. The Jinchuriki's chakra had been more potent than he'd anticipated. The brief contact had felt like touching the sun. It was a fascinating, if irritating, power. He made a hand seal, and a snake tattoo on his arm writhed, its mouth opening to disgorge a small scroll. He opened it. It was a message, written in a cipher known only to two men. The seed is planted. The experiment begins. Your move, Danzo-sama. He burned the scroll, a satisfied smile on his face. He didn't care about Danzo's political games or the fate of Konoha. All he cared about was his experiment. Uchiha Sasuke, the vessel of limitless ambition, now branded with the cursed seal of heaven, set against Naruto Uzumaki. The vessel of limitless compassion, armed with a power that could heal hearts. It was the ultimate petri dish. Hatred versus hope, which would prove to be the more potent catalyst for power. He couldn't wait to see the results. And in a land of shadow, Kageyama stood before his altar, a rare, genuine smile on his hidden face. He had felt it all. The wave of primal fear from the Sannin's appearance. The surge of impotent rage from the Jinchuriki. And most beautifully of all, the blossoming of the cursed seal. It was a glorious, concentrated note of pure, exquisite despair, a black hole negative emotion planted right beside his little beacon of light. Magnificent, he whispered to the stone. Truly magnificent. Let the darkness grow from within. Let it consume the light from the inside out. The most beautiful gardens are those where the roses are choked out by the thorns. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Sound and the Fury. The world swam back into focus to the scent of antiseptic and Sakura's quiet, hitching sobs. Naruto pushed himself up, his body aching, the snake venom poison a dull, throbbing memory in his veins. They were in a sterile, white room inside the forest's central tower. Sasuke lay on the adjacent cot, unconscious, his face pale and beaded with sweat. The cursed mark on his neck was a stark, black stain against his skin, pulsing with a faint, malevolent energy that made the air around it feel cold. The door slid open and Kakashi entered, his single eye taking in the scene with an unreadable expression. His gaze lingered on the mark on Sasuke's neck. Something dangerous flickered in its depths. Sakura, he said, his voice low and serious. Give us a moment. Sakura looked up, her eyes red and puffy, and nodded, scurrying out of the room. Kakas. I walked over to Sasuke's cot and gently pulled back the boy's collar, examining the three swirling tomo. Naruto could feel the wrongness of it, a knot of corrupt chakra that felt like a living, breathing thing. Orochimaru. Kakashi breathed, the name a curse on his lips. He knew this chakra. He knew this mark. He had seen it before, long ago, on a friend he had failed to save. He was here. He said he was giving Sasuke a gift. Naruto said, his voice rough. He bit him. I tried to use my chakra on it, sensei. The golden stuff. But it didn't work. It felt like it was feeding on it, twisting it. Kakashi's eye widened slightly. You tried to heal it. Naruto, this isn't a wound. It's a parasite. It feeds on the host's chakra and their negative emotions, their anger, their pride, their ambition, and converts it into a corrupt, intoxicating form of power. He made a series of complex hand signs, his palm beginning to glow with a purple, crackling energy. Your healing chakra is pure, positive emotion. To the cursed seal, that's like pouring gasoline on a fire. The more you try to heal the heart it's attached to, the more violently it will fight back to corrupt it. He pressed his glowing palm over the mark. Evil sealing method. Black characters erupted from his fingertips, spreading across Sasuke's skin and converging on the cursed seal, forcing it into submission. The dark tomo receded until they were just faint gray lines, contained within a spiraling seal of Kakashi's own making. Sasuke groaned in his sleep, his body racked with a final, violent tremor, and then fell still. "This will hold it, for now," Kakashi said, panting from the effort. "But it's a cage, not a cure. The power is still in there. The choice to use it, that will be up to Sasuke." He looked at Naruto, his expression grim. "This changes things. The game is far more dangerous than I thought." That danger became apparent an hour later. All 21 genin who had passed the second STAGE were gathered in a large arena at the base of the tower. The third Hokage stood before them, flanked by the Jonin sensei and a cadre of Anbu. Anko, the proctor for the second exam, looked pale and shaken. Her own cursed seal, a relic from her time as Orochimaru's student, a mirror to the one now infecting Sasuke. "Due to the unexpectedly large number of candidates who have passed," Hiruzen announced. His voice echoing in the cavernous room, "We will now hold a preliminary round to thin the herd for the final tournament. The matches will be one-on-one. The winners will advance to the finals, which will be held in 1 month's time before the feudal lords and foreign dignitaries." A massive electronic screen on the wall flickered to life, names spinning in a chaotic blur. A wave of nervous, excited energy filled the room. Naruto could feel it all. The thrill of anticipation, the cold dread of fear, the simmering bloodlust. It was a cocktail of potent emotions, and somewhere, miles away, he felt a faint, dark stirring. A distant hunger being sated. The first names clicked into place. Uchiha Sasuke vs. Akado Yoroi. Sasuke, now awake but leaning heavily against the wall, pushed himself forward. Kakashi put a hand on his shoulder. "Sasuke, you can forfeit. No one would blame you. You're in no condition to." "I'm fighting." Sasuke cut him off, his voice a low growl. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but his gaze was distant, turned inward towards the caged darkness on his neck. He needed to test it. He needed to know what this new, terrible power felt like. The fight was short and brutal. Yoroi's jutsu allowed him to absorb his opponent's chakra on contact. He was a terrible matchup for a depleted Sasuke. But as Yoroi began to drain his energy, a flicker of dark chakra escaped Kakashi's seal. A jolt of agonizing pleasure and power shot through Sasuke. He saw an opening, and with a burst of speed that surprised everyone, he used a taijutsu sequence he had copied from Rock Lee. A pale imitation of the lion's barrage, to drive Yoroi into the ground. He stood panting over his defeated opponent, his hand clutching his neck, a look of shocked, horrified craving on his face. He had won, but it felt like he had lost something vital in the process. The matches continued. Shino, Konkuro, Tamari. Each fight was a display of unique and deadly skills. Then, the screen stopped. On a pairing that made the air in the room freeze. Hyuga Hinata vs. Hyuga Neji. A murmur went through the crowd. A direct confrontation between the main and branch houses of the Hyuga. This wasn't just a match. It was a political spectacle. Hinata's face went pale. Neji simply smirked, his pale eyes filled with a cold, pitying disdain. "So, the failure gets to be publicly humiliated by a true prodigy," he said. His voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Fate, it seems, has a sense of irony. Withdraw now, Hinata-sama. Save yourself the pain of proving what everyone in our clan already knows." The barb struck home. Naruto saw Hinata flinch, her newfound confidence wavering. He saw the old fear creeping back into her eyes. He wanted to shout, to jump down there and tell Neji where he could shove his destiny. But this wasn't his fight to win. It was hers. From the balcony, he didn't say a word. He just watched her, and he focused. He didn't push his chakra out. He simply let his belief in her, the pure, undiluted conviction that she was strong, radiate from him like a steady, golden warmth. It wasn't a jutsu. It was just a presence. A silent promise that she was not alone. Down in the arena, Hinata looked up, her terrified gaze sweeping the balcony until it found Naruto's. She saw his steady, unwavering stare, his small, encouraging nod. She felt that warmth, that silent support. And it was an anchor in the storm of her fear. She took a breath, turned to her cousin, and the fear in her eyes was replaced by a quiet, burning fire. "I will not run away," she said, her voice trembling but clear. The fight began. Neji was a force of nature, his gentle fist a perfect, untouchable whirlwind. He moved with an arrogant grace, lecturing her as he fought. A person's destiny is decided at birth. You were born a failure of the main house, and I was born a prodigy of the caged branch family. These are facts that no amount of effort can ever change. He struck her again and again, closing Tenketsu points, trying to shut down her chakra network completely. But Hinata endured. She grit her teeth against the pain, remembering her training with Naruto's clones, the feeling of her own power flowing freely. She fought back with a desperation and ferocity that shocked Neji. Her movements weren't as perfect as his, but they were filled with a will, a spirit, that he couldn't comprehend. She saw an opening, a flicker of arrogance in his eyes, and she lunged, pouring every ounce of her remaining chakra into her fingertips. Gentle fist art. 2 lion palms. It was a technique she had been developing in secret. A way to project her chakra outwards. 2 shimmering lion heads of blue chakra erupted from her fists. The attack caught Neji by surprise. He deflected one, but the other grazed his shoulder. It wasn't a debilitating blow, but it was a blow nonetheless. The failure had touched the prodigy. A gasp went through the Hyuga elders watching from a special section. The hit didn't just damage Neji's body. It wounded his pride, his entire worldview. His philosophy was absolute. For it to be challenged, even for a moment, by the very symbol of weakness he despised, was intolerable. The cold arrogance in his eyes was replaced by a hot, furious rage. "You, insolent," he snarled, and he moved, his attack no longer precise and controlled, but filled with a vicious, killing intent. He appeared before her, his hand aimed not at a Tenketsu point, but at her heart. Before the blow could land, 4 Jonin, Kakashi, Guy, Kurenai, and Asuma, flickered into existence, catching his arm. The match was over. Neji stood panting, his face a mask of fury. Hinata, her body battered and her chakra depleted, coughed up a bit of blood, but she did not fall. She stood her ground, looking her cousin in the eye, not with fear, but with a quiet, defiant pity. She had lost the match, but she had won the war within herself. She collapsed a moment later, but Kurenai caught her, a look of immense pride on her face. As the medics carried Hinata away, Naruto leaned over the railing, his knuckles white. He had never felt such a cold, clear rage in his life. It wasn't the hot, explosive fury of the Kyuubi. It was a focused, righteous anger. The screen flickered again. Uzumaki Naruto vs. Inuzuka Kiba. Naruto leapt over the railing, landing lightly in the arena. He walked past Neji, who was still being restrained by the Jonin. He didn't say a word to him. He didn't have to. He just gave him a look, a promise of a future reckoning. His fight with Kiba was a whirlwind of claws, fangs, and shadow clones. Kiba and Akamaru were a powerful, synchronized team, and they pushed Naruto hard. Naruto, however, fought with a newfound control. He didn't tap into the golden chakra. He didn't let the Kyuubi's rage surface. He fought as a Konoha shinobi. He used strategy, misdirection, and a well-timed, strategically deployed fart to throw off Kiba's powerful sense of smell. He ended the match with the Uzumaki Naruto barrage, a testament to his own creativity and taijutsu, not a borrowed power. It was a clean, decisive win that earned him a round of surprised applause. He had proven he was more than just a Jinchuriki. He looked up at the balcony where the third Hokage sat. The old man was smiling, a look of genuine pride in his eyes. But next to him, Danzo was watching, his one visible eye cold and analytical. Unimpressed by such a conventional victory. In another section of the stands, Orochimaru, disguised as the Sound Jonin, licked his lips. "Such a fascinating boy," he whispered to Kabuto, who stood beside him. "He restrains his true power, while my dear Sasuke-kun is fighting to restrain his." The contrast is simply delicious. The final preliminary match ended, and the remaining genin were called back to the arena floor. The screen displayed the matchups for the final tournament, to be held in 1 month. And there it was, the first match of the finals. Uzumaki Naruto vs. Hyuga Neji. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of justice after all. Hinata, now conscious and bandaged but still weak, had been brought back to watch. When she saw the matchup, her eyes widened. Naruto turned, his gaze sweeping past the other contestants, past the Jonin, past the Hokage, until it landed on Hinata. Then he turned his head and looked directly at Neji, who was staring at him with cold contempt. "Hey, you," Naruto's voice rang through the silent arena, clear and strong. "Mr. Destiny is everything. I'm making you a promise right now." He pointed a finger at Neji, a gesture of absolute, unshakable defiance. "I'm going to fight you, and I'm going to win. I'm going to prove to you that your stupid philosophy is nothing but a bunch of crap." Then his gaze softened as he looked back at Hinata. "This is for you, Hinata, I promise." The declaration hung in the air, a gauntlet thrown down not just for a match, but for a worldview. It was a battle of fists, and a battle of philosophies. And as Naruto stood there, a lone figure of defiant hope against a backdrop of dark plots and ancient hatreds, everyone in the room, from the Hokage to the Snake Sannin, knew that this was more than just an exam. It was a crucible that would forge the future of them all. In his shadow realm, Kageyama felt the beautiful symphony of the preliminaries. He had savored the Uchiha's dance with the cursed seal's power, a delightful mingling of pain and desire. But the Hyuga conflict, that was truly exquisite. The clash between a rigid, despair-inducing tradition and a fragile, nascent hope. Neji's rage at having his perfect, fatalistic world shaken, and Hinata's courage born from the Jinchuriki's light. And now, the Jinchuriki himself had taken up the cause. He was going to fight against the very concept of a cruel, unchangeable fate. Kageyama smiled. "Yes," he whispered to the altar. "Fight it, struggle, create a grand spectacle of hope. Because the brighter the light you cast, the deeper and more satisfying the shadow will be when it finally consumes you." Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Toad and the Spider. The silence in the makeshift infirmary was a fragile thing, easily broken by the faint, sinister hum of the cursed seal. Kakashi had moved Sasuke to a private room in the tower, a place of sterile white walls and oppressive quiet. He stood over his student's bed, his single eye a storm of conflicted emotions. He had failed this boy once, by not seeing the depth of his loneliness. He would not fail him again. "I know what that mark is whispering to you, Sasuke," Kakashi said, his voice low and devoid of its usual lazy drawl. "It's promising you power, a shortcut to the revenge you crave. I know that path. I've walked the edges of it myself." Sasuke sat up, his back against the wall, his dark eyes burning with a feverish intensity. He didn't touch the seal on his neck, but his entire awareness was focused on it, on the intoxicating whisper of potential it offered. "What would you know about it? You, who had friends, a team. You don't know what it's like to have everything taken from you by the one person you looked up to." A shadow passed over Kakashi's face, a flicker of an old, unhealed wound. "I know what it's like to lose everyone. And I know that the power you gain from hatred will burn you from the inside out until there's nothing left but ash." He reached out, not with a sealing jutsu, but as a teacher to a student. "Let me help you. There are other ways, better ways, like Naruto's." Sasuke's lip curled into a sneer, a bitter, ugly thing. "You want me to what? Talk my problems to death? Heal my enemies with a hug?" He's a fool, a naive, sentimental fool. This world doesn't reward kindness, Kakashi. It rewards power. Orochimaru understands that, and so does Itachi. The name was a venomous dart, and it found its mark. The chasm between them was too wide. Kakashi's hand fell to his side. He had offered a lifeline, and Sasuke had refused to even see it. His gaze already fixed on a darker horizon. "The seal will hold as long as you don't draw on its power," Kakashi said, his voice once again professional, the moment of vulnerability gone. "But if you give in to it, if you feed that darkness, Sasuke, not even I can save you from what you'll become." He left Sasuke alone in the sterile room, alone with the serpent's whispers and the ghosts of his clan. The choice had been offered. The path was now his to walk. Naruto felt the bitter, frustrated spike of Sasuke's emotions from across the tower. It was a sharp, painful frequency. A declaration of self-imposed isolation. It hurt, knowing he couldn't reach his friend, that his one unique gift was useless against this particular brand of darkness. The helplessness churned in his gut, mixing with his cold fury towards Neji. He couldn't save Sasuke from his own choices, but he could shatter the cage of fate that Neji had built around Hinata and himself. He channeled the raw, frustrated energy into a singular purpose. He would not lose this fight. He found his shadow council atop the fourth Hokage's head, their customary meeting spot that was both symbolic and private. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of the coming rain. "He is a fortress," Hinata said, her voice quiet but firm. She had a scroll spread out on the stone, covered in her neat, precise and writing, diagrams of the Hyuga fighting stance, notes on technique, and a detailed analysis of her cousin's movements from their match. Neji's mastery of the 8 trigrams palm's rotation creates a perfect, absolute defense. His Byakugan leaves no blind spots. To attack him head-on is pointless. She then tapped a specific diagram, one showing a human figure from the back, with a small, highlighted point near the upper spine. But the Byakugan has one tiny weakness. A single blind spot, extending outwards from the back of the neck. It is small, almost impossible to strike in combat, but it is there. Zabuza grunted, peering at the scroll with a professional killer's eye. A weakness is a weakness. But it's not enough. You can't just beat this kid, brat. Your promise was to break his philosophy. You have to crush his entire worldview in front of thousands of people. A lucky shot in a blind spot won't do that. He pointed a thick finger at Naruto. His entire identity is built on his superiority. On the idea that his tragic fate as a branch member makes him stronger, more profound, than the coddled main house. You have to attack that. Hinata flinched at the mention of the branch family's fate, and Haku placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Zabuza-sama is right, Naruto-san, Haku said, his voice a calm and steadying presence. Neji's strength comes from his pain. He has embraced it, made it his shield. A direct assault will only make him feel more justified. You cannot break the shield. You must find a way to make him lower it himself. Naruto stared at the village below. The words of his friend swirling in his head. A blind spot, a philosophy, a shield of pain. He was a straightforward fighter. He saw a problem, he made a Rasengan, and he ran at it. This was different. This was surgery. How could he possibly get Neji to lower his own defenses? His training over the next week was a study in frustration. He sparred with clones, he ran laps, he practiced his chakra control, but he knew, deep down, that none of it was the key. He needed a breakthrough. He needed a teacher who understood power on a different level. He found him at the hot springs, of all places. A tall, goofy-looking man with a mane of white hair and red lines painted down his face, giggling like a pervert as he tried to peep into the women's bath. Naruto, ever the champion of justice and a fellow connoisseur of idiocy, intervened. The confrontation devolved into a ridiculous, one-sided scuffle that ended with Naruto tied to a post and the strange man introducing himself as Jiraiya, the Toad Sage. A super perv first and a legendary shinobi second. Jiraiya, it turned out, was not only Naruto's godfather and the student of the third Hokage, but also the man who had taught the fourth Hokage. And he recognized the flawed, unstable Rasengan in Naruto's hand with a single, shocked glance. You're trying to use the Kyuubi's chakra to force the rotation, aren't you? Jiraiya said, his entire demeanor shifting from goofy to deadly serious as they stood in a secluded training field. That's why you get that golden glow. It's a cheap trick. You're patching a hole in your own skill with the demon's power. You haven't mastered the jutsu at all. The words were a slap in the face. What are you talking about? I used it to save my friends. I can heal people with it. Heal them, Jiraiya scoffed, or overwhelm them. There's a difference, kid. You're blasting them with a fire hose of raw, positive emotion. It works on the weak-willed and the emotionally unstable, but what happens when you face someone whose will is stronger than yours? Someone whose despair is deeper than your hope. Your little trick won't work on a true monster. To truly master the Rasengan, and the Kyuubi's power, you need a foundation of your own. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. The truth of it hit Naruto hard. He thought of Sasuke, of how his power had failed against the cursed seal. Jiraiya was right. Their training was brutal. Jiraiya forced Naruto to learn the summoning jutsu, a pact that required a complete mastery of one's own chakra. Naruto's attempts resulted in tadpoles, then slightly bigger tadpoles. Then a frog the size of his fist. Jiraiya, frustrated, finally pushed him into a deep ravine. Summon a real toad, or you die. he yelled from the clifftop. As he fell, plummeting towards the jagged rocks below, Naruto's life didn't flash before his eyes. All he could think of was his promise to Hinata, the faces of his friends, the cold, certain eyes of Hyuga Neji. He would not die here. He would not fail them. He reached deep inside himself, past his own chakra, past the simmering rage of the Kyuubi, and for the first time, he spoke to the demon not as a jailer, but as a desperate partner. Lend me your power. The great beast, surprised by the directness, the sheer audacity of the request, unleashed a torrent of its chakra. Naruto, using the last of his own strength to control the violent flood, slammed his bloody thumb onto his palm and poured every last drop into the summoning seal. The explosion of smoke and chakra was immense. High above, Jiraiya's eyes widened as a creature of truly colossal size materialized in the chasm. The chief of the toads, Gamabunta, a boss summoned the size of a mountain, with a Tonto blade strapped to his side and a foul attitude. Naruto had survived. He had passed the test. He stood, exhausted but triumphant, on the head of the great toad. He had found his foundation. While Naruto trained with the toad sage, the spider's web was being woven. In a dimly lit tavern on the outskirts of Konoha, a place where shinobi went to be unseen, Kabuto Yakushi adjusted his glasses as he sat across from his master. Orochimaru, disguised as a nondescript merchant, took a delicate sip of sake. Jiraiya-sensei has taken an interest in the Jinchuriki, Kabuto reported, his voice a low, clinical murmur. They are training near the northern cliffs. The boy has successfully summoned Gamabunta. HMPH. Ever the sentimentalist, my old teacher, Orochimaru hissed. Polishing the fourth's legacy. It matters little. The boy's power of friendship is a parlor trick. It is Sasuke-kun who holds my interest. How is our little bird faring in his new cage? The seal is stable, Kabuto said. Kakashi's containment is effective, but the subject is agitated. He is pushing his limits, training obsessively. He is curious, hungry. The seed is taking root. Excellent, Orochimaru purred. And the other variable, the little Hyuga girl. Kabuto's smile was thin and sharp. She has become the Jinchuriki's shadow. She, along with the two Kiri-nin, have been gathering intelligence on all of the final round participants. They are acting as his personal intelligence unit. It's surprisingly efficient. He pushed a thin file across the table. These are my psychological profiles. The Hyuga prodigy, Neji, is a powder keg of resentment. His philosophy of fate is an armor built over a deep wound concerning his father's death. A wound inflicted, indirectly, by the Hyuga main house. Orochimaru's golden eyes gleamed. A wound? How delicious. And Naruto-kun has promised to defeat him. He plans to use his fists to perform therapy. How utterly crude. Indeed, Kabuto agreed. However, our associates have other interests. He subtly tapped his temple. A silent signal referencing their true master. Kageyama was not interested in the tournament's winner. He was interested in the harvest of despair. The Jinchuriki is a beacon of hope. The most effective way to extinguish a beacon is not to attack it, but to show it that its light only serves to make the shadows deeper. If Naruto-kun defeats Neji and saves him from his dark philosophy, it will be a great victory for the light. We have been instructed to ensure that any such victory is tainted. Oh, Orochimaru leaned forward, intrigued. The plan for the invasion of Konoha is already in motion, Kabuto said. The sand and sound forces are in position. But a slight adjustment has been suggested. During the chaos of the invasion, which will commence during the final match, a specific target has been prioritized. He slid a photograph from the file. It was a picture of Hinata Hyuga. Orochimaru raised an eyebrow. She is the catalyst for the Jinchuriki's current crusade, Kabuto explained. His voice turning cold. She is his promise. His reason for fighting Neji. In the event that he succeeds, in his moment of greatest triumph, imagine his despair when he NDS that his victory cost him the very person he was fighting for. Her capture, or death, will turn his greatest victory into his most profound failure. A light that bright, when snuffed out, will create the most beautiful darkness imaginable. Orochimaru considered this. It was elegant, cruel. It served his purpose of creating chaos, and it served his other master's purpose of harvesting negative emotion. It was perfect. See to it, Orochimaru hissed, a slow, serpentine smile spreading across his face. Let the hero have his stage. We will be waiting in the wings to burn the theater down around him. The night before the finals, the village was electric with anticipation. Banners hung from every building, and the streets were filled with foreign visitors. Naruto stood atop the monument, the cool night air a balm on his exhausted body. He had spent the last week not just taming Gamabunta, but working with Jiraiya to perfect his Rasengan, this time using his own chakra, his own will. The golden glow was still there, a faint aura he could now call upon at will, but the foundation was solid blue, a sphere of perfect, stable, destructive power. He could feel the village's emotional state, a chaotic mix of excitement, greed, and tension. He felt the cold, hungry nod of Sasuke's cursed seal from the hospital where Kakashi was keeping him under watch. He felt the calm, steady flame of Hinata's belief from the Hyuga compound. He felt the wary, watchful presence of Zabuza and Haku, who were moving through the shadows of the village like ghosts, his unseen guardians. He was no longer just a kid hoping to win. He was a nexus, a focal point for the hopes and fears of so many others. He looked down at his palm, where a perfect, spiraling Rasengan spun to life, its hum a quiet song of pure power. He had the strength, he had the intelligence from his friends, and he had the will. Tomorrow, he would face a boy trapped by his past and a philosophy of despair. He would face a stadium of spectators and the shadowy figures who pulled the strings. Tomorrow, he would fulfill his promise. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Breaking the cage. The roar of the crowd was a physical force. A wave of sound that washed over the arena, thick with the heat of the midday sun and the electric tang of anticipation. Thousands of people packed the stands. Villagers, shinobi, foreign dignitaries, and the daimyo of the land of fire himself, all here for the spectacle. Naruto stood in the center of the sun-bleached field, the noise fading to a dull hum in his ears. He could feel it all, the excitement, the bloodlust, the greed of the gamblers, the cold, analytical appraisal of the shinobi leaders. But he filtered it out, focusing on the single, icy signature of absolute certainty that stood opposite him. Hyuga Neji was a portrait of calm superiority. His pale, featureless eyes surveyed the roaring crowd with disdain, as if they were merely ants observing a battle between gods. He looked at Naruto, and a small, condescending smile touched his lips. So, the failure has made it to the main stage, Neji said, his voice quiet yet carrying clearly across the field. You should feel honored. Fate has decreed that you will serve as a lesson today, a public demonstration of the unassailable gap between the chosen and the worthless. The only thing I'm going to demonstrate is how to shut your mouth, Naruto retorted, his knuckles cracking as he clenched his fists. The proctor, Genma Shiranui, a jonin with a senbon perpetually dangling from his lips, sighed. All right, you two know the rules. The match begins, now. Neji didn't move. He settled into the classic Hyuga stance, his posture flawless. Before we begin, allow me to enlighten you, and this entire village. Look at my forehead, he commanded, pointing. This cursed seal is the symbol of the Hyuga branch family. It ensures we live and die to protect the main house. It is a mark of inescapable destiny. Just as your destined, why was to be hated and reviled as the vessel of the nine tails. The words struck a nerve in the crowd. A murmur of discomfort rippled through the stands. Naruto's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Hinata-sama, a member of the main house, was born with every advantage, yet she is weak, Neji continued, his voice a relentless, logical drone. I was born to the branch house, a caged bird, yet I am called a prodigy. We cannot escape what we are. And you, Naruto Uzumaki, for all your bluster and dumb luck, will never escape the fact that you are a failure. The destiny to become Hokage you spout is a pathetic fantasy. A Hokage is chosen by fate. You were not. With his sermon complete, he moved. He was a blur, a phantom of white and black, closing the distance instantly. Gentle fist. Naruto was ready. He met the assault not with a direct block, but with a swarm of shadow clones. 20 Narutos flooded the field, a chaotic wave of orange. Neji's response was a contemptuous snort. Such a crude jutsu. He began to spin, chakra flaring from every tenketsu point in his body. 8 trigrams palms rotation. He became a spinning top of pure, blue chakra, a perfect, absolute defense that repelled the clones, dissipating them in puffs of smoke before they could even land a blow. When the rotation stopped, Neji stood unscathed, not even breathing hard. "Is that all?" he asked. The real Naruto burst from the ground behind him, a Rasengan already forming in his hand. But Neji's Byakugan saw it. He didn't even turn, simply striking backward with a two-fingered jab that hit Naruto's arm with pinpoint accuracy. The Rasengan sputtered and died as a jolt of crippling pain shot through Naruto, his chakra flow disrupted. "It's useless," Neji stated, turning to face him. He began his assault, a relentless, beautiful, and terrifying dance. 8 trigrams 64 palms. His hands were a blur, striking Naruto's chest, his arms, his legs. 2 palms, 4 palms, 8 palms, 16, 32. Naruto felt his body shutting down. Each strike was precise, closing the tenketsu points in his body, cutting him off from his own chakra. It was like his internal pipes were being systematically sealed, one by one. 64 palms. The final blow sent Naruto stumbling back, collapsing to one knee. He tried to mold his chakra, to summon a clone, to do anything. But there was nothing. The well was cut off. He was just a boy, battered and bruised, kneeling in the dirt. Neji walked slowly towards him, the picture of victory. "You see, it is over. Your chakra network is crippled. You cannot even stand. This is the difference in our stations. This is fate." He raised his hand for a final, disabling blow to the heart. "It was decided the moment you challenged me, failure." From the stands, Hinata watched. Her hands clasped to her chest, her knuckles white. "Stand up, Naruto-kun," she whispered, her voice a silent prayer. Naruto, gasping for breath, looked up at Neji. He saw the cold certainty in his eyes, the absolute belief in his own grim worldview. He remembered Zabuza's words, "You have to attack his philosophy." He remembered Haku's, "Make him lower his shield." He looked past Neji, up at the cage box, and saw the third Hokage watching with concern. He saw Kakashi, tense and ready. He saw the faces in the crowd, the ones who had called him a monster, who now looked on with a mixture of pity and morbid satisfaction. And he thought of Hinata, coughing up blood but refusing to fall, refusing to surrender her will. He would not surrender his. A low growl rumbled in his chest. A faint, red aura, hot and malevolent, began to leak from his skin. "You talk a lot about fate, Neji," Naruto rasped, pushing himself to his feet, his legs shaking. "But you made one mistake." Neji paused, his hand hovering. "Oh, you forgot," Naruto said, a feral grin spreading across his face as the red chakra flared brighter, "that I'm the #1, hyperactive, knucklehead ninja. And I never go back on my word." Quote, he roared, and the Kyuubi's chakra exploded outwards. It wasn't a controlled release, it was a volcanic eruption of sheer, indomitable will. The chakra didn't flow through his network. It blasted through it, violently forcing open the 64 tenketsu points Neji had so carefully sealed. Neji stumbled back, his Byakugan widening in disbelief. It was impossible. No one could recover from that jutsu. It was like watching a man restart his own heart with a lightning bolt. "Now," Naruto said, his voice a low growl, his eyes now blood red with slitted pupils, "the lesson is about to begin." He was a different fighter now. His speed, his strength, his ferocity were amplified tenfold. He was no longer just a boy, he was a force of nature. He and Neji in the center of the arena in a clash that shook the ground. Taijutsu against taijutsu, gentle fist against demonic claw. But Neji was still a prodigy. His Kaden was a perfect defense, and he was a BLE to deflect even Naruto's enhanced blows. The fight became a stalemate, a raging inferno against an unbreakable wall. Naruto was burning through the Kyuubi's power at an alarming rate. He needed to end it. He needed a plan. He formed 1,000 shadow clones, a sea of orange that flooded the arena. Neji, seeing the tactic, prepared his Kaden. But this time, 2 of the clones broke off, each forming a Rasengan. A double, suicidal charge. Neji's eyes widened slightly at the reckless power, and he braced himself, pouring more chakra into his defense. As the 2 clones with Rasengans slammed into the spinning dome of chakra and exploded, another clone, one that had been knocked down near Neji's feet, suddenly poofed into smoke. It had been a diversion. The real Naruto wasn't in the charging crowd at all. He erupted from the ground directly beneath Neji's feet. He had tunneled underground, a simple, academy-level trick hidden within a cage-level chakra assault. He emerged directly into Neji's blind spot. Neji's head whipped around, his Byakugan seeing the attack a fraction of a second too late. There was no time for a Kaden. No time to block. Naruto's fist, glowing with a mixture of his own blue and the Kyuubi's red chakra, slammed upwards. The uppercut connected squarely with Neji's chin, lifting the prodigy off his feet and sending him crashing to the ground in a heap. Silence. The entire stadium was stunned into absolute silence. And then, it erupted. Naruto stood over Neji's unconscious form, panting, the red chakra receding. He had won. But the fight wasn't over. "You think you know pain," Naruto said, his voice carrying across the now quiet arena. "You think you're the only one who's ever been looked at like you're worthless. I grew up with no family. No friends. The whole village looked at me like I was garbage. I was alone." He walked over to where Neji was beginning to stir. "Being called a failure. I know exactly what that feels like. But I never let it become my destiny. I decided that one day, I'd make everyone acknowledge me. I'd become Hokage. That's my choice, not my fate." He pointed up to the stands, at Hinata, who was watching with tears streaming down her face. "And her. She fought you, knowing she would probably lose. She fought you because she wanted to change herself. She's no failure. She's one of the strongest people I know." In the cage box, a figure appeared behind the third Hokage, a figure many recognized as Hyuga Hiyashi, Hinata's father. He leapt down into the arena, landing softly near his nephew. The Hyuga elders in the stands gasped. "He is right, Neji," Hiyashi said, his voice filled with a weary regret. He looked at the boy he had helped mold into a vessel of resentment. "Your father was not forced to die for the main house. He chose to. He sacrificed himself to protect me, his brother, and to protect the village from a war with Kumogakure. It was his will, his choice, not his fate." He bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect and apology from the head of the clan to a boy from the branch house. "I have allowed you to believe a lie because my own grief and pride stood in the way of the truth. Forgive me." Neji stared, his world crumbling. The foundation of hatred and resentment he had built his entire life upon was a lie. The cage he had so proudly inhabited was one of his own making. He looked at Naruto, at the boy who had been dealt a far crueler hand by fate, and yet stood tall, not as a victim, but as a shaper of his own future. For the first time, the cold certainty in Neji's eyes was replaced by a dawning, painful understanding. Genma, the proctor, finally shook himself from his stupor. "The winner is Uzumaki Naruto." The crowd roared, a genuine, thunderous wave of approval. They weren't cheering for the Jinchuriki. They were cheering for Naruto. In that single, perfect moment of triumph, as Naruto's grin spread from ear to ear, it happened. A white feather drifted down from the sky. And another. And another. A wave of drowsiness swept over the stadium. The roar of the crowd died into a collective, sleepy sigh. Feather illusion jutsu. Then, the explosion. A section of the cage box erupted in smoke and flames. 4 figures stood on the roof, surrounding the third Hokage. Orochimaru, his disguise shed, smiled down at the chaos. From the outer walls, 3 giant snakes, massive as buildings, smashed through the stone, their roars shaking the very foundations of the village. Sound and sand shinobi poured into the arena. The invasion had begun. "It's starting." Zabuza Grow W led from a shadowed alcove high in the stands. He and Haku had remained hidden, observing. His hand was on the hilt of his blade. Haku, however, was not looking at the cage box. His eyes were scanning the invading forces, his analytical gaze picking out patterns in the chaos. He saw a small, elite squad of sound ninja break away from the main assault. They were not attacking the Konoha Jonin. They were moving with a singular, terrifying purpose, flanking the main battle. Their trajectory was unmistakable. "Zabuza-sama," Haku said, his voice sharp with sudden urgency. "Look, that squad." Zabuza followed his gaze. "They're not part of the main force. What's their target?" Haku's eyes widened, a cold dread washing over him. The squad was heading for the section where the Hyuga clan was seated. Where Hiashi had just left. Where a tired, emotionally overwhelmed, and now sleeping Hinata sat, completely defenseless. It was a perfect, cruel piece of strategy. In Naruto's moment of absolute victory, where he had fulfilled his promise and saved a friend, they were coming for the very person who had inspired it all. Their target, Haku breathed, his voice barely a whisper. It's her. Chapter 8 End.